Good afternoon, everyone. The first item of business today is consideration of Business Motion 8297 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a timetable for the Stage 3 consideration of the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill. I would ask any member who wishes to speak against the motion to press the Request to Speak buttons now. And I now call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 8297. Thank you very much. As no member has asked to speak against the motion, I will now put the question to the Chamber, which is that are we agreed to motion number 8297 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick? We are. The next item of business is Stage 3 proceedings on the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill. In dealing with the amendments, members should have the bill as amended at Stage 2, the martial list and the groupings. The division bell will sound and proceedings will be suspended for 5 minutes for the first division of the afternoon. The period of voting for the first division will be 30 seconds. Thereafter, I will allow a voting period of 1 minute for the first division after a debate and 30 seconds for all other divisions. Members who wish to speak in the debate on any groups of amendments should press the Request to Speak buttons as soon as possible after I call the group. Members should now refer to the marshalled list of amendments, and we will now move to that. I now call Amendment 1 in the name of the Deputy First Minister, grouped with other amendments as shown in the groupings. Deputy First Minister, to move Amendment 1 and speak to all amendments in the group, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This group consists of 24 minor and technical amendments spread throughout the bill, which were identified during a review of the bill following Stage 2. They make minor changes consequential on amendments made at Stage 2, update cross-references, improve the consistency of wording within the bill and make minor drafting amendments. I'm going to run through the amendments briefly in turn, and I apologise in advance for the length of my remarks in this group. I think in the next few minutes I may be about to prove that not all aspects of passing historic legislation are exciting. Let me turn to Amendment 1. At Stage 2, the Referendum-Bill Committee agreed to amend the bill to require the Electoral Commission to publish permitted participants' pre-poll donation and loan reports during the referendum period, so voters have as much information as possible about the sources of campaign funding. Section 12 sets out detailed arrangements for publishing documents the Commission must make public, including the register of permitted participants and referendum expenses returns. Amendment 1 will apply these arrangements to publishing the pre-poll reports on donations and loans. Amendments 5 and 48 correct erroneous cross-references. Amendments 22 and 23 relate to the security of postal ballot papers. Amendment 26 amends the definition of postal ballot paper to ensure that the definition covers ballot papers before they are actually issued to voters and during the issuing process. Amendment 49 adds a reference to this definition to the list of defined expressions in Schedule 8 for ease of reference and to ensure that the definition can, where necessary, apply to references to the term elsewhere in the bill. Amendment 27, paragraph 54(8) of Schedule 2 applies the provisions of paragraph 53 of that schedule requiring secure destruction of documents to the marked polling list. Amendment 27 ensures consistency by bringing the wording of paragraph 54 into line with government amendments to paragraph 53 at Stage 2. If I can turn now to Amendments 28 and 29. When a voter asks for their ballot paper at the polling station, the presiding officer may ask them a set of questions to ascertain that they are entitled to vote. In certain cases, a voter's name will appear on a notice of alteration to the register of electors rather than on the polling list. And Amendments 28 and 29 simply ensure that in those cases the presiding officer refers to the correct document when they are asking the voter to confirm their identity and entitlement to vote. Amendment 30 relates to an amendment brought forward by Annabel Goldie at Stage 2 to Schedule 3, Rule 33 of the bill. And it might assist if I just explain a little bit more fully why a further amendment to that provision is proposed. As Annabel Goldie made clear at Stage 2, the intention behind the amendment was to clarify that although the decision of the counting officer on a ballot paper is final, the decision could be made subject to judicial review. However, the amendment was drafted in such a way as to omit the word final from the rule in question, which means that in its current form, the rule no longer states that a decision made by a counting officer in respect of a ballot paper is final. Amendment 30 in this group therefore reinstates the word final, which will ensure that Annabel Goldie's original intentions are delivered. Amendment 31 is proposed in light of the changes Amendment 53 would make to definitions in the bill. In terms of Amendments 35, 54 and 55, paragraph 23 of Schedule 4 requires the responsible person of a permitted participant to declare the accuracy of the permitted participant's referendum expenses return under paragraph 20. Amendment 35 inserts a definition of regulated transaction for the purpose of this declaration, in line with the definition of relevant donation. And for consistency and ease of reference, references to the definitions of relevant donation and regulated transaction are added to the list of defined expressions in Schedule 8 by Amendments 54 and 55. Turning now to Amendments 37, 38 and 39. As Parliament is aware, permitted participants will be required to report donations and loans which exceed £7,500 in value, either individually or aggregated. Amendments 37 and 38 correct a drafting error to clarify that it is regulated transactions which exceed £7,500 which must be reported. Amendment 39 makes a small change to the details of transactions required in the Statement of Regulated Transactions to refer to a transaction of a description in paragraph 43.3 of Schedule 4 instead of only 43.3a. Amendment 40, Presiding Officer, paragraph 57 of Schedule 4 provides for pre-poll reports on regulated transactions entered into by the permitted participant. Amendment 40 is a very minor amendment for consistency in the provisions on pre-poll reports. In terms of Amendment 41, paragraph 58 gives the Sheriff power to order the position to be restored if satisfied that failure to comply with the transaction report requirements was caused by those attempting to conceal the existence or true value of a transaction. Stage 2, the Referendum-Bill Committee agreed to amendments to insert paragraph 57A in Schedule 4, which provides for the responsible person to declare that pre-poll transaction reports are accurate. Amendment 41 therefore extends the Sheriff's power to cover these requirements. The purpose of Amendment 42 is to bring the provision into line with the equivalent provision under the 2010 PEPERA Civil Sanctions Order. Paragraph 28A3 of Schedule 6 permits the Sheriff to issue a compliance certificate for a discretionary requirement following an appeal against the Electoral Commission's decision not to issue one. The reference should be to the appeal rather than the initial application to the Commission, so this amendment alters the reference accordingly. Amendments 51 to 53 are minor amendments to ensure clarity over the definitions of the Local Government Register and Register of Young Voters. And with those comments, Presiding Officer, it gives me great pleasure to move Amendment 1.
Well done. Now Colin Tavish-Scott.
Deputy Presiding Officer, I found the explanation from the Deputy First Minister highly stimulating on all those amendments, but I wonder if I could just ask her to reflect, by no means am I opposing these amendments, but I wonder if I'd ask her to reflect on the balance of many new amendments being introduced to Parliament at Stage 3, as opposed to those that, of course, are responding to issues that have been raised in earlier stages of the bill. I do this, not least of which, because in some reading I did last night for her bill, I found two very good points of order, one from Bruce Crawford and one from John Swinney, going back to the Licensing Scotland Bill Stage 3 in 2005. And Mr Crawford may remember this well. Now, in fairness, those amendments that Mr Crawford was taking very fair exception to were manuscript amendments. And, of course, the Deputy First Minister is not proposing that today. But I do think it is important that when we consider our Stage 3 proceedings from a parliamentary point of view, we might give some thought to the balance of new amendments at Stage 3 as opposed to those, of course, that are consequential on previous discussions on the bill.
Many thanks. Deputy First Minister to wind up, please.
Glad that Tavish-Scott found my explanation of my amendment stimulating. I wish I was able to reciprocate, but we can't have everything. That was a joke before he takes it too seriously. These are technical amendments. I think it is right and proper that as the bill is reviewed, as we go through the process, any minor tidying up amendments are made, and this is an appropriate place to make them with the ability of the Parliament to scrutinise them fully. But as is always the case with Tavish Scott's interventions, I will of course reflect carefully on his comments and feed them back into the process in terms of future legislation.
Many thanks. And so the first question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes, we are. Thank you. We'll now move to Group 2 and call Amendment 2 in the name of the Deputy First Minister, groups Amendments 3 and 4. Deputy First Minister to move Amendment 2 and speak to all amendments in the group, please.
These amendments are related to changes made to the bill at stage 2, which were designed to allow counting officers to start issuing postal ballot papers before the cut-off date for applying for an absent vote in the referendum. We acted at stage 2 in response to requests from electoral administrators and the Electoral Commission to allow more time for the issue and receipt of postal ballot papers. The amendments address concerns that the wording of the bill could mean that postal ballot papers could not be issued to some postal voters with certainty that the person would be a postal voter any earlier than the normal 11 days before the poll. The bill, as drafted post-stage 2, linked entitlement for some to an absent vote to being on a list of absent voters at the cut-off date, which is defined as being the 11th day before the referendum. The amendments remove some references to the cut-off date, which will mean that the counting officer is able to issue postal ballot papers as soon as it is practicable to do so, without the bill specifying when this should take place. This will retain the intention of the amendments agreed at stage 2, while addressing the concerns raised about the practical application of the amendments. It's likely that the Chief Counting Officer will issue a direction to counting officers on this subject to ensure consistency. I move Amendment 2.
Many thanks. And as no one else has asked to speak, do you have anything you wish to say in winding up, Deputy First Minister? Thank you. So the question is that Amendment 2 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. Thank you. I now call Amendments 3, 4 and 5. All in the name of the Deputy First Minister and all previously debated. And I invite the Deputy First Minister to move Amendments 3 to 5 en bloc.
Moved.
Thank you. And if any member objects to a single question being put to Amendments 3 to 5, there being no objections, the question is that Amendment 3 to 5 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. We are. We now move to Group 3. And I call Amendment 6 in the name of the Deputy First Minister in a group on its own. Deputy First Minister to move and speak to the amendment, please.
Amendment 6 is a minor technical amendment which removes the maximum signature size limit on proxy and postal vote application forms. It brings the requirements for the application forms for the referendum into line with those for other elections, and it's intended to ensure that the design of the forms doesn't have to be changed for the referendum, ensuring consistency and also value for money. I move Amendment 6.
Many thanks. And I call Annabel Goldie.
Before the Deputy First Minister has a heart attack, I don't propose to oppose the amendment. I wish to apologise to you and the Deputy First Minister for my late arrival. I was misinformed about the time of commencement of proceedings.
Many thanks. Deputy First Minister, would you like to wind up? Right. So the question is that Amendment 6 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. We now move to Group 4, and I call Amendment 7 in the name of the Deputy First Minister, grouped with Amendment 8 and 9. Deputy First Minister to move Amendment 7 and speak to all amendments in the group, please.
In response to comments from electoral administrators and the Electoral Commission, the Scottish Government amended the bill at stage 2 to extend the eligibility for making an application for an emergency proxy vote. The bill currently permits emergency proxy applications after the 11th working day before the referendum on the grounds of a disability recently suffered, or because the voter is likely to be unavoidably absent from home on polling day, or for occupation, employment or service reasons. The bill provides that voters can make such an application at any time between 11 days before the poll and 5 p.m. on the day of the poll. To address any security concerns, the bill includes a requirement for attestation for all applications for an emergency proxy vote. However, the Electoral Commission has suggested that this represents an unnecessary inconvenience for voters applying between 11 and 6 days before the poll, who under the arrangements for local government and parliamentary elections would not normally require to have their applications attested. As I made clear to the committee during stage 2, there are sound reasons for why we amended the bill in this way. That said, I'm sympathetic to the concerns raised by the Electoral Commission and by the committee. I therefore ask Parliament to agree these amendments, which will retain the extension of eligibility for emergency proxy applications that was agreed at stage 2, but remove the attestation requirements for applications made between 11 and 6 days before the referendum. This approach will address any concerns about arrangements being consistent with voter expectations about attestation requirements while maintaining the security and flexibility of the system. I move Amendment 7.
Many thanks. Now Colin Lewis-MacDonald.
Thank you very much. The Deputy First Minister has brought forward amendments which appear to me to bring the bill closer to the model under the Political Parties Elections and Referendum Act and the model preferred by the Electoral Commission. It does seem nonetheless that we are in a position where the approach taken to postal and proxy votes at the referendum is somewhat novel. I have been involved in many elections and a number of referendums in Scotland over the years. Never have I been involved in a poll where voters could appoint a proxy to vote on their behalf on polling day itself. Of course, a very high turnout can be expected next September, and measures to encourage high turnout are, of course, welcome. But it does seem to me that the provisions on balance that we've agreed, including these amendments, while they do move the absent voting back nearer to the Electoral Commission's original position, does create a novel situation. And I wonder if the Deputy First Minister would agree with the Electoral Commission in responding to these amendments when it says that the complexity created by successive government amendments at stage 2 and stage 3 has resulted in a new category of application for emergency proxy votes between the 11th and the 6th days before the poll, for which new guidance will require. Might it have been easier all round if the government had perhaps followed the existing approach in the first place, rather than introducing what are novel arrangements?
Many thanks. Now Colin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I would just like to say that I think Mr MacDonald is wrong in some aspects of this, because on polling day at the Donside by-election, there was an emergency proxy given to a lady who was in for chemotherapy at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I think that his take on what happens at this moment is slightly wrong.
Many thanks. I now call on the Deputy First Minister. If you wish to speak, or wind up, please.
Well, can I say to Lewis-MacDonald that we have made amendments to this part of the bill directly in response, in some cases, to calls for amendments to be made to this part of the bill. I seem to recall at stage 1 of the Parliament's scrutiny of this bill, Patricia Ferguson, Mr MacDonald's colleague, called for us to make some of the amendments, and I think she was right to do so. So we've listened carefully to the points that have been made. In terms of the Electoral Commission's briefing in relation to Group 4, welcomes amendments to the application procedures for emergency vote applications, including the removal of the need for attestation for applications made before the 5th day before the poll. The briefing notes that the Commission expects the Chief Counting Officer to issue guidance on this process. So we've tried to meet the concerns. We had a discussion at stage 2 about whether it was right to bring the proxy vote application timescale into line with postal votes, and points were made then that wouldn't have catered for all of the concerns that were raised about, the example that has been used in the Chamber before was the Icelandic ash situation, where people at very short notice would be unable to come home to vote. So I think we've struck the right balance here. I think we have arrangements in place now that are reasonable and robust, and I would hope that all members, in light of that, would feel able to support the amendment that I'm proposing today. Many
thanks. And so the question is that Amendment 7 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. I now call Amendment 8 in the name of the Deputy First Minister, already debated with Amendment 7. Deputy First Minister to move, please.
Moved.
Many thanks. And so the question is that Amendment 8 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. I now call Amendment 9 in the name of the Deputy First Minister, already debated with Amendment 7. Deputy First Minister to move, please.
Moved.
Many thanks. So the question is that Amendment 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. We now move to Group 5 and call Amendment 10 in the name of the Deputy First Minister, grouped with Amendments 11 to 21 and 24 and 25. Deputy First Minister to move Amendment 10 and speak to all amendments in the group, please.
Presiding Officer, the bill, as amended at stage 2, contained a process to be followed when a person had been issued with a postal vote but had changed his or her mind and wished instead to vote by proxy. This involved the return of the postal vote papers and the cancellation of the postal vote. Following discussion with the Electoral Commission, we propose to amend the bill further to provide a fuller process to allow postal ballot papers to be cancelled where people switch between the 4 methods of voting in person, by post, by proxy or by postal proxy, or where they change their address after the papers have been issued. The proposed amendments are based on similar provisions to be introduced for Westminster elections throughout Scotland by UK legislation. I move Amendment 10.
Thank you. And since no one else has asked to speak, I take it you have nothing to say in winding up. And so the question is that Amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. I now call Amendments 11 to 31, all in the name of the Deputy First Minister and all previously debated. I'd invite the Deputy First Minister to move Amendments 11 to 31 en bloc.
Moved.
Thank you. And I would invite any member who objects to a single question being put on Amendments 11 to 31 to press the request to speak button now. Thank you. A member has objected, so we'll put... Right. Does any member object to a single question being put? Okay. No member objects. So the question is that Amendments 11 to 31 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you very much. We now move to Group 6. I call Amendment 56 in the name of Lewis MacDonald, grouped with Amendments 57 and 58. I now call on Lewis MacDonald to move Amendments 56 and speak to all amendments in the group. Please, Mr MacDonald. Thank
you very much. These amendments bring us to the heart of the bill, the rules governing those campaigning in the referendum itself. We have agreed on a cross-party basis on most of the rules about designated organisations, permitted participants and spending limits, to ensure both fairness and transparency, so that voters can hear both sides of the argument and so that they can know who it is who is making those arguments. Spending limits will be effective only if the rules about who can spend the money are effective. These amendments are intended to ensure that those organisations and individuals who are permitted to spend money are open and honest with the voters about who they are. People taking part who are not seasoned campaigners are, of course, very welcome, and these amendments would not affect that. They would, however, make it more difficult to have front organisations or to come up with clever means of registering twice, because they would explicitly deny access to separate spending limits for any organisation which is not genuinely separate from another permitted participant or designated organisation. So no body would be recognised as a permitted participant if it was largely run or funded by another such body or shared with that body a lead officer with powers of representation, decision-making or control, nor would the lead officer of a permitted participant be able to register as a permitted participant in his or her own right. These restrictions do not limit the ability of individuals or organisations to take part in the referendum, but they do ensure transparency about who they are. Now, the committee divided on similar amendments to these at stage 2, when they were opposed by the Deputy First Minister and rejected by SNP members of the committee. I would ask the Government to think again today, however, because I believe that the amendments which Nicola Sturgeon has brought forward on spending to a common plan make these amendments all the more necessary. We will debate the Deputy First Minister's amendments in a moment when we reach Group 7. I would simply note at this point that any reduction in accountability of small organisations for spending under a common plan should be balanced by an increase in transparency about who such organisations actually are. Our amendments in this group provide for such increased transparency and do so in a way which I believe is compatible with the Government's own approach. They do not run counter to any of the provisions supported by the Electoral Commission. Rather, they build on them to address a specific concern. I believe they will make the bill stronger and give voters greater certainty about just who it is who is seeking to influence their vote. I move Amendment 56 in my name. Many thanks. I now call on Annabel Goldie.
Deputy Presiding Officer, thank you. And can I say I'm in sympathy with the amendments put forward by Mr MacDonald, because I think they do something useful, and that is they actually create a specific distinction, as Mr MacDonald has indicated, about who is campaigning for what and under what guise. And I think in doing that, there is an additional and welcome degree of clarity provided to the bill and a transparency then to the public. And I think it's that transparency to the public which is all important. So I both welcome and I support the amendments.
Many thanks. Colin Tavish-Scott.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. These are a sensible stab at a genuinely difficult issue, and I believe that Lewis MacDonald has sought to improve the legislation. I also would observe that the Deputy First Minister has made some very sensible remarks about transparency in the course of the legislation that we've been considering, and the evidence that the Referendum Committee has taken from the earlier stages of our deliberations has been again very strong on the simple principle of transparency. And therefore, when a measure comes forward, even albeit at this late stage, having had a Stage 2 debate, I do believe there is merit in seeing what can be done to strengthen it, for the very reason that the Deputy First Minister has, I think, and I agree with her on this, has made from day one, which is the bill must command public support. It must be seen to be entirely beyond reproach. And these amendments, in my view, seek to help that. And in that sense, I hope the Chamber will support them.
Thank you. Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. There are a range of principles involved, and I think during our Stage 1 and 2 discussions on the committee, members recognised that we need to strike a balance between many of these principles. Transparency, yes, encouraging people to participate freely and ensuring that rules prevent or close down the possibility of the rules being misused. I wonder if Lewis MacDonald, in closing on this group, could just go into a wee bit more detail, though, about what he means to achieve with these amendments, and in particular the definition of closely connected which he offers. It seems to me that in including in that definition that the body shares a person who has powers of representation, decision-making or control in relation to a permitted participant might go a wee bit too far. We know that there are many people who are involved in different forms of activism and campaigning in Scotland on a range of issues who happen to be members of many different organisations and actively involved in many different organisations. Is he suggesting that two permitted participants or two organisations, one of which is represented on the other, would be covered by this? Or is he simply talking about an organisation which happens to have one or more members in common on its organising committee? That, it seems to me, that latter, it seems to me, would be going too far in inhibiting people from participating freely as members of two different organisations.
Many thanks. I now call the Deputy First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Lewis MacDonald lodged 3 similar amendments at Stage 2, which at that time were rejected by the committee. I want to set out again today the reasons that I gave to the committee why the government was and continues to be unable to support these amendments. In signing the Edinburgh Agreement, the Scottish Government committed to ensuring that the regulations for the referendum campaign should be based on existing legislation for elections and referendums. These amendments that are proposed by Lewis MacDonald today would depart from the PEPERA regime in a way that I argue is untested and which could lead to unforeseen and unintended consequences. I actually think Patrick Harvey's question in his remarks underlines and highlights the complexity at the heart of this and the fact that these amendments, as drawn, would in some respects give rise to more questions than answers. At Stage 2, the committee agreed a government amendment which will place a limitation on responsible persons to limit the scope for a single campaigner to attempt to circumvent spending limits by establishing multiple campaign groups. That amendment, which is now paragraph 3A of Schedule 4 to the bill, as amended at Stage 2, was recommended by the Electoral Commission based on a similar provision made in the enabling legislation for the referendum on the parliamentary voting system in 2011. I absolutely recognise Lewis MacDonald's concern about the possibility of permitted participants being set up to allow larger campaign organisations or political parties to increase their spending capability by spreading it across multiple campaigners. Clearly, that would not be within the spirit of the legislation, and I have no question that Lewis MacDonald is sincere in trying to ensure that we're minimising any potential for that to happen. However, the proposed government amendments to the Common Plan provisions, which we're going to come on to and discuss in a few moments, will make the rules in the bill more certain. They will strike a balance in avoiding over-regulation for small campaigners, but at the same time ensuring that there are safeguards to prevent abuse of the campaign regulations. The Electoral Commission have made clear that there is a great deal of advantage in like-minded campaigners working together to put forward a consistent message to voters. There is absolutely nothing wrong with such activity in itself. We've therefore worked with the Commission to ensure that the rules for campaigners working together are sufficiently robust to prevent organisations or individuals from exceeding their spending limits or avoiding reporting requirements by using smaller campaigners to incur spending on their behalf. We've tried to do this in a way that doesn't discourage smaller campaigners from participating, and the amendments therefore seek to minimise the administrative burden on unregistered campaigners. And I would note, and I'll come back to this in my remarks in the next group of amendments, the Electoral Commission supports the Government's proposed amendments. I think an important point to stress is that any campaigners taking the action that Lewis MacDonald is seeking to limit would be very likely to be seen to be working to a common plan and would therefore be subject to the controls that exist in those circumstances. So for these reasons, I hope that Lewis MacDonald will welcome the amendments that the Government is proposing when we come to them in relation to common plans. But I'm again unable to support these revised amendments for the reasons that I've set out.
Many thanks. I now call on Lewis MacDonald to wind up and press a withdraw his amendment, please.
Thank you very much, and I welcome the support expressed by both Annabel Goldie and Tavi Scott, and I agree with Mr Scott that Nicola Sturgeon has shown her sympathy for the principle of increased transparency during the course of the bill, and I welcome the tone of her comments today. However, I think the issue remains a real one, and one that is not fully addressed by the provisions for the Common Plan. Yes, such organisations would be covered by those provisions. That is clear. In response to Patrick Harvey's question about the definitions within these amendments, the term powers of representation, decision-making or control reflects language used in other legislation under consideration and essentially means a person with a lead role, not simply membership in each of two relevant organisations. So the intention is not to prevent campaigners from engaging in the campaign in different ways or wearing different hats, so to speak, but to prevent a situation where one organisation is acting effectively as a proxy for another. That, I think, is a real concern. It's something that I believe should be addressed, and on that basis I will press these amendments.
Thank you very much. So the question is that Amendment 56 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not agreed, and there will therefore be a division. And as this is the first division of the afternoon, we will now suspend for 5 minutes. very much. Order. And we will now proceed with the division on amendment number 56. Please vote now. This will be a 30-second division. The result of the vote on amendment number 56 is yes 49, no 65. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I now call amendment 57 in the name of Lewis MacDonald, already debated with amendment 56. Lewis MacDonald, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. So the question is that amendment 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. We are not. There will therefore be a division. This will be a 30-second division. Please vote now. The result of the vote on amendment number 57 is yes 51, no 64. There were no abstentions, and this amendment is therefore not agreed. I now call amendment 58 in the name of Lewis MacDonald, already debated with amendment 56. Mr MacDonald, to move or not move?
Not moved.
Many thanks. We will now therefore move to Group 7, and I call amendment 32 in the name of the Deputy First Minister, grouped amendments 33 and 34. Deputy First Minister, to move amendment 32 and speak to all amendments in the group, please.
The purpose of the Common Plan rules is to allow campaigners to work together to provide a coordinated message to voters and to allow designated organisations to lead coordinated activity amongst like-minded campaigners while discouraging campaigners from working together as a means of circumventing spending limits. Therefore, paragraph 19 of Schedule 4 provides that where campaigners work together without a designated organisation, expenses incurred by any of them under the Common Plan will also be taken to be incurred by the others. The intention is that where campaigners work with a designated organisation, the designated organisation is taken to have incurred the total amount, and the other campaigners don't need to count any of that spending against their individual spending limits. The provisions as introduced were based on those used for the 2011 AV referendum, with the additional requirement that the rules only apply where there is a designated organisation for each outcome. The Referendum-Bill committee has given serious and careful consideration to these provisions, and the issue was discussed at some detail at stage 2. I said then that the Government would have further discussions with the Electoral Commission about the provisions, including the amendments proposed by Patrick Harvey at stage 2, and that I would report back to the committee ahead of stage 3, which I did in the form of a letter to the convener last week. In looking at possible amendments, we have tried to balance concerns expressed by some members about the possibility that designated organisations might try to exploit smaller campaigners in order to get round the spending controls, with the concerns expressed by others who wanted to make sure that smaller, unregistered campaigners wouldn't be faced with a disproportionate administrative burden that might lead to them inadvertently breaching the rules. Paragraph 19(2) of Schedule 4, as currently drafted, provides that Common Plan participants should count the total Common Plan expenditure towards their own expenditure for the purposes of paragraph 17, 18 and 20 to 23. Amendment 33 will remove the reference to paragraphs 20 to 23 so that the rules are confined to paragraphs 17 and 18. This means that participants in any Common Plan will be responsible for ensuring compliance with the wider reporting and financial controls for only their own spending. It would be impractical to expect Common Plan participants to provide, for example, copies of invoices and receipts, or to confirm that donations were from permissible sources in relation to spending undertaken by someone else. This amendment, which was recommended by the Electoral Commission, should significantly reduce the administrative burden on campaigners working together. Where a campaign plan doesn't include a designated organisation, campaigners will continue to count the total campaign Common Plan expenditure against the threshold to register as a permitted participant and against the individual spending limits. Amendment 34 will do two things. Firstly, it will clarify the intention that where a Common Plan involves a designated organisation, the designated organisation is taken to have incurred the total Common Plan expenditure, and the non-designated participants will be taken to have incurred none. And secondly, it will provide that any unregistered campaigner who spends more than £10,000 on behalf of a designated organisation will be required to register as a permitted participant. Therefore, unregistered campaigners who spend less than £10,000 on behalf of a designated organisation will be completely exempt from the Common Plan rules, but those spending more than £10,000 will need to register, and although their expenditure will count only against the designated organisation's spending limit, they will still need to ensure that their expenditure complies with the wider reporting and funding controls. Amendment 32 is consequential in these amendments and inserts a reference to new subparagraph 3A to make clear that paragraph 19(2) applies with these changes when a designated organisation is involved. In summary, Presiding Officer, these amendments are intended to provide greater clarity about how the Common Plan rules will work in practice, and they're intended to achieve an appropriate balance between robust and transparent funding controls and minimising the administrative burden on smaller unregistered campaigners. In particular, they seek to ensure that unregistered campaigners working with a designated organisation are not subject to additional requirements over an unregistered campaigner working alone. We've had detailed discussions with the Electoral Commission about these amendments, which they support as an improvement on previous provision in this area. It is true to say that no legislation can provide for every eventuality or scenario, and it's right that we don't try to do so. Oversight of the rules in practice will be a matter for the Commission, who have indicated that they will take a flexible and proportionate approach. And with these comments, I'm happy to move Amendment 32.
Many thanks. And I call Drew Smith.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. As Lewis MacDonald said in the last group, throughout the passage of this legislation, Scottish Labour has supported strong Common Plan arrangements on the face of this bill, and we've consistently argued for the maximum possible transparency of relationships and spending between organisations which may work in partnership at particular points of the campaign. The provisions which the Scottish Government are seeking to amend rightly and, of course, apply to both sides of this debate. So we do not wish to see any advantage to one side or other as a result of how the Common Plans are interpreted, either by the Electoral Commission designated organisations or permitted participants. At stage 2, concerns were raised about the burden of reporting on smaller parties and other organisations, and we understand the motivation behind seeking to remove some of these burdens. We would have preferred that it had been possible to ensure that changes to this part of the bill were subject to further scrutiny at an earlier stage, particularly as the changes were not recommended by the committee in its report. However, we do recognise the concern which Patrick Harvey expressed at stage 2, and while we were not convinced by the original amendment, in light of the comments of the Electoral Commission and others, we are content that these amendments do strike a reasonable balance and will reduce the need for double reporting, which we accept would be particularly onerous on smaller parties, and we will support Amendments 32, 33 and 34.
Thank you. Patrick Harvey.
Thank you. I'd just like to put on record my support for the amendments that have come forward in this group. I was concerned at stage 2 not only that we might be placing a burden which would be reasonable to place on a large, well-resourced organisation, but placing that on small, unresourced organisations or individuals, but also that such organisations, small campaign groups or individuals who might have no intention or no realistic prospect of spending anything like the spending threshold themselves could be inadvertently committing an offence, or could be perceived to be committing an offence by dint of their participation in a common plan. I think this amendment does make a more successful attempt at addressing the issues that I was raising at stage 2. I'd like to thank the Deputy First Minister for bringing it forward.
Many thanks. And I call on the Deputy First Minister to wind up, please.
I thank Lewis MacDonald and Patrick Harvey and Drew Smith for their comments. I think what we have done here is find consensus on quite a complicated and difficult issue, and a consensus that strikes the right balance. So I'm grateful to colleagues for their constructive comments in getting us to this position.
Thanks. And so the question is that Amendment 32 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are. Thank you very much. I now call Amendments 33 to 35, all in the name of the Deputy First Minister and all previously debated. And I invite the Deputy First Minister to move Amendments 33 to 35 en bloc.
Moved.
Thank you. And does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 33 to 35? As no member does, the question is that Amendment 33 to 35 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. We now move to Group 8 and call Amendment 36 in the name of the Deputy First Minister, group with Amendment 50. And I invite the Deputy First Minister to move Amendment 36 and speak to both amendments in the group, please.
Presiding Officer, as is usual practice ahead of elections and referendums, the Bill provides for a pre-referendum period during which certain restrictions will apply to the material which can be published by Scottish ministers and other devolved public bodies. These provisions have been closely scrutinised over time by the Electoral Commission, the Referendum-Bill Committee and the Parliamentary Bureau, and the Bill was amended at Stage 2 to exempt certain specified material published by or under the auspices of the Scottish Parliament corporate body. Paragraph 25 of Schedule 4 currently provides for the 28-day pre-referendum period to end on the day before the referendum. The Electoral Commission has pointed out that this differs from the equivalent provision in PEPERA, which provides that the 28-day period ends on the day of the relevant referendum itself. Amendment 36 therefore amends the bill to provide that the 28-day pre-referendum period will end on the day of the referendum. That also means that there will now be only one day during the pre-referendum period when Parliament will be sitting, and that day is Friday, the 22nd of August. And of course, in the spirit of the discussion at Stage 2, I would hope that the restrictions on government activity on this last day before recess would be taken into account in scheduling parliamentary business. As I said during Stage 2 consideration of these provisions, it is vitally important that the referendum should be run in a way that reflects the highest standards of fairness, probity and transparency. These provisions place responsibilities on all of us to ensure that our conduct as public servants is beyond reproach so that voters can have confidence in a fair result. Amendment 50, Presiding Officer, is a minor drafting amendment to bring the wording of the definition of the 16-week referendum period into line with the wording used elsewhere in the bill to define periods, and I move Amendment 36.
Many thanks. And as I take it, you have nothing further to add. In winding up, the question is that Amendment 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are? Yes. Thank you. I now call Amendments 37 to 42, all in the name of the Deputy First Minister and all previously debated, and I invite the Deputy First Minister to move Amendments 37 to 42 en bloc, please.
Moved.
Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 37 to 42? As it appears that no member does, the question is that Amendment 37 to 42 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you very much. We are. We now move to Group 9 and call Amendment 43 in the name of the Deputy First Minister, group with Amendments 44 to 47. And I invite the Deputy First Minister to move Amendment 43 and speak to all amendments in the group, please.
Presiding Officer, I'm sure it will come as a great relief to all members to hear that these are technical amendments which extend existing offence provisions in the bill to cover proxies for voters in the same way as they cover people voting in person. And these amendments will help to enhance and maintain the integrity of the referendum process. And I'm happy to move Amendment 43.
Many thanks. And so the question is that Amendment 43 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Thank you. I now call Amendment 44 to 55, all in the name of the Deputy First Minister and all previously debated. And I invite the Deputy First Minister to move Amendments 44 to 55 en bloc, please.
Moved.
And also invite any member who wishes to object to a single question being put on Amendments 44 to 55 being moved en bloc. As no one has objected, the question is that Amendments 44 to 55 are agreed to. Are we all agreed? Many thanks. And that ends consideration of amendments. Thank you all. And so we will now move to the next item of business, which is a debate on motion number 8239 in the name of Nicola Sturgeon on the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill. I'd invite members who wish to speak in the debate to press the Request to Speak buttons now. And I now call on Nicola Sturgeon, Deputy First Minister, to speak to and move the motion. 10 minutes or thereby. Deputy First Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to open this Stage 3 debate on the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill. And I want to start by thanking everyone who's been involved in the development and scrutiny of this historic piece of legislation. Firstly, let me thank all three parliamentary committees for their detailed scrutiny of the bill. In particular, I want to thank the Referendum Scotland Bill Committee and its clerks under the excellent convenership of Bruce Crawford. I won't turn round to see if he's blushing at this particular moment. The committee has made a significant contribution to the bill through very careful and balanced consideration. Whatever their political views, committee members have been meticulous in examining many complex aspects of electoral law to ensure that we have a robust legislative framework for a fair referendum and ultimately for a result in which everyone can have confidence. The committee's consensual approach is a testament to the Parliament's commitment to this aim, and I want to thank members for their support of the bill to date. The bill's also benefited enormously from the level and quality of advice received from practitioners in this area, and I am indebted to the electoral community in Scotland for their expert advice and guidance. When the Government published Your Scotland Your referendum in January 2012, we said that the referendum would be run and regulated in the same way as any Scottish election, to the same standards and with the same guarantee of fairness. As we near the end of the parliamentary consideration of the bill, I am confident, very confident, that the detailed proposals we have developed will achieve that aim. This is, by necessity, a large and complex piece of legislation. It has drawn on existing electoral legislation while making improvements where possible on the basis of lessons learned in recent polls. Electoral professionals, including the Electoral Management Board, the Elections Working Group of the Society of Local Authority Lawyers and Administrators, electoral registration officers and others have been an invaluable resource to help refine the provisions and ensure that the bill reflects best practice. We have also listened to and been guided by the views of the Electoral Commission, as we said we would be. Electoral professionals and the Electoral Commission are the people who will be running and overseeing the referendum, so I am particularly pleased to note their confidence in the bill's ability to provide them with the necessary framework to deliver a referendum that meets the highest international standards. I also want to take this opportunity to thank again the more than 26,000 people who responded to our consultation last year and took the time to share their views on how the referendum should be run. My thanks also go to the independent researchers who undertook a professional and robust analysis of those responses in the face of considerable media scrutiny. Can I place on record also my sincere thanks to my own officials in the bill team. They have done an absolutely sterling job on the franchise bill that has already passed Parliament and also on this bill. They've worked incredibly hard in a very complex area, and I'm very grateful to them for the work that they have done. I want to say one final thank you this afternoon before moving on to the substance of the bill, and that is to the former Secretary of State for Scotland, Michael Moore, who, through his constructive approach to the Edinburgh Agreement negotiations, paved the way with the Scottish Government for bringing us to this point today. I think he did a good job in that, and while we have many differences of opinion, not least on what we want the outcome of the referendum to be, I think his role in this process should be recorded, and I want to place on record my thanks to him here today. Presiding Officer, in the year and a half since the Government's consultation closed, the First Minister and I signed that Edinburgh Agreement with David Cameron and Michael Moore, paving the way for a referendum that will be what we always said it would be, designed and delivered here in Scotland. The Section 30 order was made following consideration by both parliaments, confirming this Parliament's right to legislate for the referendum. And the Scottish Government has introduced two referendum bills, the one we are debating today and the recently enacted Scottish Independence Referendum Franchise Act 2013, which will, let us remember, enable for the very first time in a national poll 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in this referendum. And, Presiding Officer, the consensual process that has led us to where we are today, with two governments on opposing sides of this very important national debate, but nevertheless coming together in the interests of the people we serve, does, in my view, offer a template for the negotiations that will follow a yes vote in the referendum in September next year. Let me turn, Presiding Officer, to some of the particular changes that have been made to the bill as it has progressed through Parliament. Since we introduced it in March, the Government has listened very carefully to the views of Parliament and stakeholders. Where it was right to do so, we've amended the bill. At stage 2, for example, we lodged amendments in response to concerns about the deadline for absent voting applications and to enable the children of service voters posted outside Scotland to vote in the referendum. We also supported a number of non-government amendments which sought to clarify and improve certain aspects of the bill, including Liam MacArthur's amendment to the publishing restrictions during the 28-day purdah period. The amendments we considered earlier this afternoon are largely technical and drafting amendments to fine-tune the provisions in the bill and ensure that they're as clear as possible. The amendments, as we've just heard, to the common plan arrangements were more substantial. And again, we have been mindful of the committee's views in determining our approach. During stage 2, several members of the committee raised concerns about how the common plan rules would achieve the desired balance between providing robust controls and transparency while enabling smaller campaigners to participate without undue burdens. I think Patrick Harvey in particular argued that latter point very persuasively indeed. The debate, although we didn't agree on all amendments, was an important one, and notwithstanding those differences, I believe the amendments agreed earlier today have improved the bill as a result. We did our best to respond to concerns raised by Lewis MacDonald at stage 2 in relation in relation to the attestation requirements for applications for emergency proxy votes by amending the bill to ensure greater continuity with existing arrangements. So we have sought at every stage in this process to adopt a consensual and constructive approach. We now, of course, turn to the practical arrangements for the delivery of the referendum. In September, the Electoral Commission published its progress report on the preparations for the referendum, and they concluded that those preparations, and I quote, are currently on track for delivering a well-run referendum in the interests of the voter. The Commission commented that the bill provides sufficient clarity on roles and responsibilities in the referendum and on the rules for the conduct of the poll. The convener of the Electoral Management Board, who will, of course, be the chief counting officer in the referendum, has, with the support of the board, started planning the delivery of the referendum, including the governance arrangements, project and performance management, guidance and areas where the chief counting officer might wish to make a direction, for example, in planning an overnight count, which I'm sure all of us in the chamber welcome very much. The Scottish Government, of course, will fund this work and will set out the financial resources available to counting officers in a fees and charges order in the new year. The Electoral Commission have confirmed that they are on course with their preparations for public awareness activities and have circulated draft campaign guidance to prospective campaigners. It is, of course, vital that voters have the information they need to make a considered decision in the referendum. The Electoral Commission will provide factual, impartial information on how to vote and how to register to vote, but it will be for us as campaigners to set out the arguments on which the people of Scotland will make that decision. The Scottish Government has already published a number of papers on how we would realise our vision for an independent Scotland. And of course, we will publish that white paper on Scottish independence on the 26th of November, which will set out the overwhelming case for Scotland becoming an independent country. It will set out our proposals for using the powers of independence to build a Scotland that is more prosperous and fairer than it is, and will set out very clearly the choice people will make in September next year. I have no doubt whatsoever, we've seen this already, that the debate will be passionate, at times heated, but we all have a responsibility to ensure that the debate is of a high quality and that we present informed, constructive arguments to voters. We must continue the ethos of cooperation and consensus that has been demonstrated in considering both referendum bills into a respectful, honest and fair debate from now right up until polling day. Presiding Officer, I think we can be proud today that we're passing legislation that will put Scotland's future into Scotland's hands. I hope that the people of Scotland will seize that opportunity, seize that future, seize that prospect of a better Scotland with a resounding yes vote in September next year. But in the meantime, it gives me great pleasure to move that the Parliament agrees that the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill should be passed.
Many thanks. I now call on Drew Smith, and you have around 8 minutes.
Thank you very much. Presiding Officer, Scottish Labour welcomes this Scottish Independence Referendum Bill, and we will be voting yes at decision time this afternoon.
Order, please.
After that, I fear that
the
consensus may break down again somewhat. I'll come on to the committee, Presiding Officer, but could I echo the Deputy First Minister's thanks to the various electoral professionals and, of course, particularly to all those members of the public who engaged in the consultation and everyone who has played a part in bringing us to this point. Because, in my view, the time has come for this question to be settled. Scotland's constitutional future has been key to Scottish political debate all of my life, and without naming any names, Presiding Officer, I know that some members have been advocating the end of the Union for longer even than that. So no doubt they are as keen as the rest of us to decide once and for all on this question. The choice is either a separate Scotland or a continuing partnership with our nearest neighbours, the people with whom we share these islands and with whom we have together built the institutions which act as levellers in our society, our welfare state, our National Health Service, and many of the things which people all over Britain are proud of. These are, in many cases, achievements which have been won by a labour movement across the UK, and on this side, we have no intention of walking away either from our collective achievements or abandoning others to face our collective problems alone. Now, Presiding Officer, I've said before that I respect the right of nationalists to put the case for independence, and I've said before that this referendum provides an opportunity for us to make a positive choice, whether it is for independence from the UK or partnership in the UK. And following the passage of this bill, it will be our responsibility, alongside others, to ensure that while the political arguments are indeed, as the Deputy First Minister said, contested, we treat each other as fellow Scots, each side pursuing their arguments because it is what we believe to be the best for our country. On this side, we believe that Scotland enjoys the best of both worlds, decisions taken here on many of the day-to-day issues which concern voters most. But alongside that, we can share risk and resources between people so that we can create a better society, not just for Scots, but in fact for all of the people of Britain. Now, up to now, Presiding Officer, the debate has concentrated on many process issues. When will the referendum be held? Who will vote? Even who will debate who on television? And with the exception, perhaps, of the latter, we are now past this, and we all look forward to the White Paper, because there is a need for answers on the issues of substance. What would our currency be? If it is to be retention of the UK pound rather than euro, as used to be argued, or a Scots pound, as I'm sure some on the SNP benches would prefer, then how will this work without a pact between London and Edinburgh? On both Europe and pensions, the position has been asserted but then contradicted again almost as often. On energy markets, financial regulation, the benefit system, defence and even the monarchy, the position has changed to such an extent that partnership with the UK is in fact the position which the nationalists argue themselves. The 2011 election, of course.
John Mason.
I just wonder if the member could give us a definite position on the currency for the UK if the UK continues. Will it be the pound, and if so, how long will it be the pound, or will it be the euro?
Drew Smith.
To confirm to Mr Mason, if he's confused by this, that the best way to keep the pound in the pockets of the people of Scotland is to remain in the United Kingdom. The Presiding Officer, the 2011 election and the Edinburgh Agreement between the UK and Scottish governments did indeed pave the way for this legislation, and as an opposition we have engaged with the Scottish Government constructively, despite our differing positions on the Constitution. We have welcomed Nicola Sturgeon's answers to our questions about the position of 16 and 17-year-olds living abroad with Forces families, and it is to the committee's credit, as well as the government's, that a solution to this has been found. We have raised concerns about the Common Plan arrangements because we too want the campaign to be regulated to the highest international standards. While we did not quite reach agreement on all of the amendments this afternoon, I do welcome again the Scottish Government's acceptance of our amendment at stage 2, which prescribes a role for the Electoral Commission in guiding lead campaigners around those provisions of this bill. I understand that the committee will shortly meet to consider secondary legislation arising from the Franchise Bill, and it would be remiss not to thank our convener members and clerks, as well as the government and their officials, for the work that has been done to date. When the Deputy First Minister contributes later again in debate, I would welcome an indication of whether she believes that that committee could in fact have a continued role in terms of the scrutiny of the White Paper, because this will be Minister's prospectus. This will be Minister's prospectus for a separate Scotland, and it is vital that the Scottish Parliament has the opportunity to interrogate it properly. Does she believe that the Referendum-Bill Committee, other committees, or indeed a special White Paper Committee should lead this task by taking evidence from the experts on what the Scottish National Party are proposing? Because we do hope that the White Paper will address many of the issues in more detail than we have heard up to now. One of them, Presiding Officer, is, I have to say, the issue of the Clyde Yards, and to my mind this is a situation which goes to the heart of this independence debate and the Scottish Government's approach to it, because despite the fact that the Nationalists have been campaigning for a separate Scotland for nearly 90 years, little thought appears to have gone into some of the practical repercussions of that position, because it seems to me that you either take the view that jobs building UK defence ships on the Clyde are a price worth paying, in which case you should be honest about that, or you believe that those workers can and should be redeployed on some other task, in which case you're, in just one moment, Ms MacDonald, in which case you're duty-bound to put forward a plan which is robust and indeed open to scrutiny.
Margaret MacDonald.
Thank the member for giving way, and I may have missed it, and I apologise if that's the case, that Labour should have a strategy and policy for shipbuilding in the Clyde. Do they intend it to be all military orders? And if they do, who's going to pay for them, given that they're just about bankrupt and can't afford to pay for the ships they've already got in the stocks? Drew Smith.
Well, I actually think that the record of the previous Labour government in bringing work to the Clyde is a proud one. However, I mean, we are more than happy to debate the issue of diversification in the order book of the Clyde Yards, but I mean, I would ask the question. I mean, both Govan and Scotsman are owned by a defence contractor building defence ships, so I'd be very interested in whether the Deputy First Minister put the case to BAE Systems that they should diversify their business into other ships, and what their response to that was. Now, Presiding Officer, asking questions in this debate should not be viewed as a negative thing to do. So it is disappointing that when an academic spoke out this week to express his view, a Minister of the Scottish Government contacts his boss to complain. And members can groan about that, but I think actually they should be embarrassed by the conduct of that Minister, because this debate can and should be better than that. Rules and regulations such as we are debating in this bill will not honour their own ensure good conduct of the campaign, and neither will be any use for enforcement of those rules to take place afterwards, because this is a vote which no one would wish to see us rerun. I said earlier that this debate has been central to Scottish politics all of my life, and that is why I support settling this next year. But in the meantime, we do not want to see government exist only as a campaign. I believe that government has the power to change people's lives in the here and now. They should not put Scotland on pause to concentrate only on independence, because in the meantime, real people...
Order, please.
Because in the meantime, real people are facing real challenges which are the responsibility of this government now, not after 2014, not after 2016, but today and on every day leading up to the 18th of September. I think, Presiding Officer, my constituents can accept that this government has a particular constitutional ambition, but they do not accept that their everyday concerns are secondary to it, and neither do they believe in the convenience of every answer to every problem facing Scots just happening to be independence. The choice facing Scotland next year is one between separation and partnership, independence and union. To my mind, it doesn't actually matter what terms you use, but it does matter that the question which this bill provides for does not crowd out all of the other issues to which answers need to be found. Scotland is an old nation, Presiding Officer, but I believe the United Kingdom is in fact still a young country. There is no inevitability in the progressiveness of the limitation or of the limitations of the other. To suggest, as the Yes campaign has up to now and the Deputy First Minister repeated, is somehow uniquely incapable of change or progress is wrong. I fully believe that the people of Scotland will vote no next year, not because they are against change or progress, but because change and progress are achieved not by constitutions, but by people working together. And on this side, we look forward to the people having their say.
Thank you. And I now call on Annabel Goldie, and you have around 6 minutes.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I have to say that when scrutinising this bill as a member of the Scottish Independence Referendum-Bill Committee, I was taken back to an experience at my primary school. That's not an allusion to either the Scottish Government or my colleagues in the committee. The occasion was a primary 7 Christmas party, as we like to style it, dance. We'd been learning all these marvellous Scottish country dances. I loved and still love the music. There were interesting things emerging called boys, and I just couldn't wait to get to this dance. But my mother, on the other hand, was solely concerned with what I was going to wear and whether I possessed any, never mind suitable but presentable shoes. And she was right, because that detail required thought and attention, or the dance wasn't going to work. And in a sense, this is similar. We're all caught up in the debate, the excitement of the referendum, the preparations for it. Whatever side of the argument we're on, we're already out there taking part in debates, we're attending public meetings, we advance our views with passion, we field the questions with vigour, deal with challenge robustly, and there's excitement in the air. And I guess I'm not alone, I love it and I want to be in the thick of it. And 18 September next year is right at the heart of my unionist calendar. But to happen, the referendum needs its own clothes and shoes. It can't work without them. So, scrutinising the Scottish independence... Sorry, Mr Swinney wants to participate. I'll take an intervention.
John Swinney. Ordered, please. Annabel Goldie. And the point is that if members do wish to participate, then they should request an intervention. But if not, then they shouldn't participate from the sidelines. Annabel Goldie.
A taciturn Mr Swinney. I'm very glad he wasn't at the school dance. I have to say, Deputy Presiding Officer, that scrutinising the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill has been an essential and a not unenjoyable task. And just as the Deputy First Minister said, I wish to place on record my thanks to our convener, Bruce Crawford, to our clerk, Anne Brunillen and his team, and to our advisers and to SPICE. We may not have done a dashing white sergeant or a gay Gordons round the committee room, but we got there. And that was in no small measure down to our convener's skillful and wise stewardship, together with the impeccable guidance and attention to detail from the clerking team. And our advisers and SPICE certainly kept us from straying down some cul-de-sacs. So all of them in their own way, although they may not have realised it, have produced the clothes and shoes to ensure that the rest of us can go to the ball. Now, the Stage 1 report noted, when we debated it, that the committee was confident its inquiry had enabled this important bill to be subjected to a wide-ranging and robust scrutiny process, but pointed out some aspects did require adjustment and clarification. And I think that was a neat summation of the position then. I think Stage 2 did produce a constructive set of amendments to address the need for adjustment and clarification, and that has proceeded today. On the amendments, I was sorry that Mr MacDonald's amendments weren't accepted. I think the clarity of the bill would have been enhanced had they been so. So it is with regret, in my opinion, that they failed. But I do accept the Scottish Government's amendments on a common plan are welcome, and they do provide, I think, an important clarification. The Deputy First Minister may remember that at Stage 1 I did mention my ongoing concern about the behaviour of Scottish Government quangos during the purdah and regulated periods, and indeed she provided a welcome acknowledgement of these concerns, and she confirmed that the Scottish Government would issue guidance to relevant public bodies, and she has offered to provide a draft of such guidance to the committee. Now, the committee does continue in being, even although this bill will pass this evening. So, can I ask the Deputy First Minister when the draft guidance is likely to be available? Now, obviously, while both the regulated period and the purdah period are naturally the subject of focus, I think, in my opinion, and I'm not alone, the sooner that guidance is available, the better. I think it will provide reassurance to a lot of people that these government bodies are getting some kind of steer, some kind of framework within which to operate. I think we also need to know, because there may be some ambiguity about this, perhaps she can clarify exactly what body she anticipates being covered by the guidance. Other than that, Deputy Presiding Officer, I support the bill. I think the bill does deliver a workable mechanism for 18 September 2014. Like Mr Drew Smith, I confidently expect Scotland then to reject overwhelmingly separation from the rest of the United Kingdom.
Thank you very much. We now turn to the open debate, speeches of 6 minutes. And I call Bruce Crawford to be followed by Malcolm Chisholm.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I just wonder whether it would be Strip the Willow or the Dashing White Sergeant that I would most enjoy having a dance with Annabel Goldie with. But perhaps one day that will happen, Annabel. Today, though, I'm not talking as the convener of the Referendum-Bill Committee, but as an SNP backbencher. So, but in saying that, let me thank the clerks, all my committee members who were helping through the scrutiny process. I thought it was done very well. About reaching the Stage 3 debate of the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill, I think I'll repeat that. The Scottish Independence Referendum Bill has been a much more positive and encouraging experience than many of us might have predicted at the outset of the process. A process, as the Deputy First Minister rightly said, began in the January of 2012 with a publication of the Scottish Government consultation paper. And if you recall, around that time there were a great many stupid and silly scare stories about how the SNP was somehow hell-bent on gerrymandering the referendum process to somehow fix the result we wanted. Well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating today, is it not? And the passing of the bill at decision time, these stories will have been proved to be just as silly and stupid as the Scottish Government claimed they were at the time. Now, looking back over that period, it reminded me much of the hysteria that existed in some parts of political and media circles about the advent of the incoming SNP government in 2007. Some predicted the government wouldn't last a month, certainly would never get its budget passed, would be inherently unstable. Indeed, the four horsemen of the apocalypse could be seen riding towards Scotland apace. Well, just like the silly and stupid scare stories around the referendum process, these earlier predictions about the fate of the SNP government never came to pass. And what's transpired is a period of stable and effective government, which, in these circumstances, which were unusual, is certainly, if not unique, among Western democracies. Certainly unique when set alongside the churn and turmoil of political office we see at Westminster, no matter whether that's a coalition or majority government. On the referendum, there were silly and stupid claims around the consultation on the bill itself, about the question, about the proposed date, even, yes, about Vote 616 and votes for service personnel. A Scottish Government consultation that the Deputy First Minister quite rightly reminded Parliament that attracted over 26,000 responses, compared with only 2,857 responses to a similar exercise carried out by the UK Government. A referendum question that was submitted to the Electoral Commission, amended by that organisation and now considered acceptable by all parties in this Parliament, contrary to what some of the doomsayers predicted at the outset. All of this completed in a reasonable manner, with due regard to process, despite all the daft claims. Much noise also trumpeted about the proposed date of the referendum, yet I believe, not unsurprisingly, we will all support the proposed date when we reach decision time. Of course, many of these scare stories, at least in the referendum process itself, effectively ended with the signing of the historic Edinburgh Agreement between the Scottish and UK governments. A mature agreement signed by both governments that helped lay the foundations for a parliamentary committee process which I believe was carried out in a very effective and robust manner. And let me at this stage, like the Deputy First Minister, recognise the significant role played by Michael Moore, the Secretary of State for Scotland, in regard to the drawing up of the Edinburgh Agreement. It was very much due to Michael's constructive and reasonable approach, together with the Deputy First Minister, that enabled the agreement to come into being. You know, I always found Michael's approach to be refreshingly candid, honest and challenging when he needed to be, but always with the right tone and attitude. And talking of tone and attitude, I suspect that Michael's removal from office will soon become a matter of regret for Nick Clegg, if the recent performances of his self-styled bruiser are anything to go by. The Edinburgh Agreement enabled the Scottish Government, the Referendum-Bill Committee and this Parliament to have before it today a bill which we can all endorse as fit for purpose and which the people of Scotland can have confidence in. As I said at stage one, I was pleased to note the Electoral Commission felt the bill was a strong piece of legislation that truly put the voter first. And I'm delighted to see that evidence before us that's come before stage 3 to confirm their thoughts at that time. And during stage 1, I also said, if we can make the debate in future devoid of rancour and bitterness and about hope, aspiration and taking Scotland forward, then people from all parts of Scottish life will want to take part. And I remember others around the chamber on that day, Annabel Goldie, Tavish Scott, Lewis MacDonald, Alec Johnson and Patrick Harvey, all picked up on that theme. Obviously, these scare stories, though, these voices, have not been heard, with a scare story a day emanating from Westminster and Project Fear. Well, I say on this historic day, keep it coming. It's a strategy guaranteed to produce a diminishing return and will only serve to undermine the enthusiasm of those yet to decide how to vote for a failing structure in the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, we'll be relentless with our positive message about trusting the people of Scotland by putting them in charge of their own huge richness of resources, both human and natural, putting the people of Scotland in charge, ensuring them that they get a government they voted for every time to help eradicate unacceptable levels of poverty and inequality that shamefully still exist in our nation, in a nation where we are still spending untold billions on weapons of mass destruction. So I'll put my money on aspirations and hope, winning out over scaremongering and fear, and trusting in the people of Scotland being put in charge of their own destiny.
Thank you very much. For the avoidance of doubt, can I just reiterate that there is time available so that members could have up to 6 minutes, and indeed it would be appreciated if members were able to take 6 minutes in the open debate. I call Malcolm Chisholm to be followed by Claire Adamson.
Presiding officer, my voice is on pause, so the wisest thing maybe not to take 6 minutes, but this is an important debate, so I did want to speak today. We agree with the objective of the bill to provide for a fair, open and truly democratic process which is conducted and regulated to the highest international standards in the lead-up to the referendum next year. And I was very pleased to receive a briefing from the Electoral Commission yesterday, which indicated that they do have confidence in the process that has been put in place by this bill. We also welcome some of the developments that have taken place during the course of the bill. We welcome the fact that the Scottish Government has now extended the franchise of the referendum to include children, or young people, I should say, aged 16 to 17 of armed forces personnel living abroad. We also are pleased that the Scottish Government has responded to some of the concerns raised about the bill, both by ourselves, other parties and by the Electoral Commission. I am slightly disappointed that there was not unanimity today around the amendments moved by Lewis MacDonald. And of course the result of that is that the only people to vote no today were the SNP during amendments 56 and 57. We support the bill because it provides the opportunity for the independence question to be settled. It is important that the result of the referendum is clear and accepted internationally so that Scotland can move forward. We hope as part of the UK on this side, but with the question settled once and for all, or certainly for a generation. We want the referendum campaign to be conducted in a fair and transparent way, with each side respecting the other. I do have a fear, and I think other people share that fear, that while the procedures now are generally agreed to be right, the tone of the debate is sometimes in danger of going wrong. How we conduct, I'll give way to Margaret MacDonald.
Margaret MacDonald.
I'm doing you a good turn. Because I respect the member so much, Deputy Presiding Officer, I must ask him this. He once again used the phrase once and for all. Does he believe that it is ever possible to settle any principled question once and for all?
Malcolm Chisholm.
Well, I'm sure Margaret MacDonald did hear the qualification that I did make. I said, or at least for a generation. So I hope we can at least agree on the latter, if not the former. Now, how we conduct this debate, I believe, is going to be important, not just for the next few months, but also for the months and years that follow the referendum. I think it's very understandable that on both sides there is a great deal of emotion in this debate, and that underlies a lot of the arguments that we use, particularly around the economic questions which are going to be central to the referendum. But notwithstanding the emotions, I think we should always remember, and perhaps particularly on a day like this, which is an important staging process in the process, that at the end of the day, the two sides on this question are not enemies. We all inhabit the same country. We all share many of the same values and in many cases agree with many of the policies in other parts of the political debate, and that applies to this chamber as well, where members, for example, in Labour and SNP can agree in broad terms in the approaches to many aspects of domestic and even international policy, but have a profound difference when it comes to the constitutional question. And I think it's actually quite similar in the country as well. There are many families where one member may be voting yes and another member may be voting no. And I think it's very important that we conduct this debate without losing the friendships and the positive relationships that we have in this country and in this chamber. And I think it's really important to say that today, because it will be important, I think, not least for what happens after the referendum, because whatever the result, we've all got to come together on the 19th of September, and whatever the people have decided, we've got to act upon that. So I think we should remember that. We mustn't create we mustn't create a legacy of bitterness and hatred. At the end of the day, what we need to have is a civilised debate rather than warfare between two tribes.
Thank you very much. Given that there is some time still available in the debate due to the earlier business being concluded earlier than expected, if members in the chamber felt inclined to contribute, they could press the request to speak buttons just now, even if they haven't previously indicated that they wanted to contribute. I call Claire Adamson to be followed by Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am not a member of the Bill Committee, but I would like to echo the sentiments of the Cabinet Secretary in drawing to our attention the very hard work that has been done by all members of that committee under the stewardship of Bruce Crawford. And I think everyone who has been involved in this process, whether it's working on the Edinburgh Agreement or on the scrutiny of the bill through the committee process, should be congratulated, and we owe them a debt of thanks in this chamber for having reached the conclusions that we have today. Indeed, I do remember Annabel Ewing at Stage 1 debate speaking of her great pleasure at being a member, and I think it was echoed by her mother too, and pride at being involved in that process. So as one who has been on the sidelines, I'm very glad to speak this afternoon. Like Malcolm Chisholm, I was interested to see the Electoral Commission's response to the Stage 3 debate, and in their submission they talk of the bill providing a well-run referendum which has the confidence of voters and campaigners and is underpinned by a clear and certain legal framework. And I would say that this is a robust legislative framework that everyone can be confident in. I was somewhat disappointed then to read in the press during the week the suggestion from former Forces Minister Adam Ingram MP, I stress the MP, who suggested that there might be an attempt to reverse the yes decision during the two-year transition period on the vote in September 2014 and independence in 2016. I would draw his attention to the events in Glasgow this week over the proposals to raise the Duke of Wellington's plinth in order to prevent the cones being placed on the head of the Duke of Wellington, and suggest that once the Scottish people have made their minds up about something, it's a very brave person indeed who would suggest that they couldn't have their way. So I would caution against this approach. During this debate, and the debate about Scotland's independence, the opposition parties have often said that this 300-year-old union is the most successful partnership of nations in the world. Indeed, I heard Anne Maguire using a similar sentence in Scotland Tonight when she was debating the issue this week. But I can't help but wonder on what basis they are actually looking at success. We are the most unequal country in Europe, the fourth most unequal country in the developed world. We have the lowest male life expectancy in areas in the east end of Glasgow. In my hometown, following the closure of Ravenscraig, we had the highest male unemployment rate in Europe. We have been drawn into illegal wars. And maybe it was Anne Maguire's appearance on the television this week. I'm reminded that just recently we have endured closure of Remploy factories across our country. I don't see these as measures of success at all. Scotland deserves a fairer society. Scotland can afford a fairer society. And Scotland, with the passing of this bill today, has the opportunity to choose a fairer society. On the news the other night, Anne Maguire also used the phrase that she hoped the next UK government would be a Labour government. My hope for Scotland is that she has a government that she votes for, that represents the values, represents the choices of the Scottish people, and that we are not in the position of having a UK government or a government foisted on us that does not reflect how we want to be seen as a nation. If I could give just an example of why I believe this is so important, it's from this very week in the Chamber when the Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead was informing on an update on the EU CAP budget. Had Scotland been a member state as an independent nation in Europe, Scottish farmers and crofters would have received the full benefit of external convergence. It is clear that the UK's uplift is a direct result of low payments in Scotland. Were it not for Scotland, there would be no uplift for the UK, and therefore, in the interests of justice, that rebate, 100% of it, should have come to Scotland's farmers. If I can quote the Cabinet Secretary from Tuesday, he said, "During my time in this job, there have been many examples of UK policy undermining Scottish agriculture. I thought Hilary Benn's decision a few years ago not to compensate sheep farmers or foot and mouth disease was a low point, but this is even worse than that. The decision goes against the intentions of the EU. It defies the wishes of the Scottish Parliament, and it takes away from Scottish farmers and crofters resources that should be theirs and on which their livelihoods depend. It is no surprise that Scottish farming and crofting leaders are bitterly disappointed by this decision." And this is just one example of why I believe that this 300-year-old union no longer works in the interests of Scotland. Could I conclude, Presiding Officer, on a very personal note, because my son will be 17 at the time of the referendum, and I will have an opportunity to vote for the first time. And it's one of the greatest privileges for me and for all my colleagues as politicians to work with young people tackling sectarianism in our society, fundraising for hospices, international aid, advocating and supporting fair trade. These young people are more than capable of examining the issues around the referendum. I want them all the young people of Scotland, to embrace the opportunity to ask the big questions. Where is Scotland's place in the world? What kind of values do I want the country to have? What are my priorities for my country's future? And I am very glad that they will have an opportunity to do this next year.
Thank you very much. And I now call Tavish Scott, to be followed by Jamie Hepburn.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Earlier I met a government minister from Jordan who described to me the 1.5 million Syrian refugees that country is currently dealing with, their challenges on sanitation, on water, on food, and on indeed educating the hundreds of thousands of children that are now new to Jordan's schools. I think on days when we band around the word historic, we probably should think about those who are less fortunate than us and live in challenging circumstances wherever they be around the globe. I want to briefly start by thanking Andrew Milne and his clerks, to the committee, to the advisers who gave the Referendum-Bill committee trenchant and helpful consideration during the course and proceedings of this Act, or this bill rather. I also want to thank Bruce Crawford for convening the committee in the way that he did. Bruce made quite fairly a political speech today, much of which I enjoyed, not all of which I agreed with. But he did set the manner of how the SNP clearly want to frame the debate in a way which I just don't recognise. I think it is entirely fair for all of us who disagree with the proposition of separating Scotland from the rest of the United Kingdom to question that, and question that very robustly indeed. And just because you question it doesn't mean that you're anti-Scottish Scottish or anything else. So if, in agreeing with Mr Crawford's point about raising the tone, let us all hope that is what happens, rather than what we have seen from some in his party just in the last few days in respect of the current Scottish Secretary. I also want to thank the Deputy First Minister for the tenor of her remarks and the manner in which she has conducted the bill. I think she has been very fair about how she has done that. I agree with her observations on the introduction of votes for 16 and 17-year-olds. I noted with great interest the very decisive verdict that 16 and 17-year-olds came to in Aberdeenshire in a recent very widely held plebiscite in schools in that part of Scotland. I thought that set a very interesting level of both engagement, of which there was very full engagement, and also, more to the point, a very interesting result in terms of what may happen next year. Like others on the Bill Committee, I too have raised a number of issues in relation to the way in which the campaign will be fought and the way in which the campaign will be conducted. I make no bones of my concerns about the use of taxpayers' money for what are quite clearly political activities, and I think that will happen. I don't see any way in which that will be stopped, and there may be many deliberations after next September on what happened and how it was done. But in my view, there isn't much that stops taxpayers' money being used in that particular way. Give way to Patrick Harvey.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful to Tavish Scott for giving way. I wonder if he could just explain whether his concern about the use of taxpayers' money being used for political purposes is directed at both governments or only at one of them. Well,
indeed it is, and I made that point in the committee, Mr Harvey, but you didn't support nor did anyone else for that matter, support the particular measure I proposed at that time in the committee. So I think I hope you might reflect that I made that point about all and was clearly in a minority of one. Well, nothing new particularly there. And I also have to say, Presiding Officer, that I also have deep concerns about how much public money, taxpayers' money, will be used in the context of the White Paper. It is very clear from what we are told that the White Paper is going to be sent to every household in Scotland. I don't think it's right that taxpayers' money is used to send, as the Deputy First Minister... No, can I make this point? That the Deputy First Minister said in her remarks that it's going to be published shortly. It's clearly going to be sent to every household in Scotland. I wonder, Presiding Officer, whether it will be announced in Parliament or whether it will be announced to the media. I hope the Presiding Officers will stand up very firmly for the rights of this Parliament to hear this major statement of government policy first before we hear it addressed to CNN, to the BBC and to the Scotsman. But I rather suspect the media will be rather more important than a mere Parliament on a day like that. Can I also raise the historic questions that have been pushed by the government of the day and indeed by members of their benches in relation to the alternative? I believe there is an onus on those of us who do represent the best of both worlds, the continuance of Scotland within the United Kingdom, to make a strong case, as I have always done, for more powers to this Parliament. I believe this Parliament should be strengthened and augmented in terms of its responsibilities. I believe that from the day I was elected to it, and I hope that those who similarly hold that view can make that case in the coming months as well. Because the one point could I just finish this point and then I'll be happy to give way? The one point I would entirely concede to Bruce Crawford, because he's made this point to me on many occasions, is that there is an onus on those of us who make that case to come up with that plan, and I accept that challenge, and I'm personally very happy to take it. Give way to Margaret MacDonald.
Margaret MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a point that intrigues me. The member claims that he has the best of both worlds. By implication, does this mean that the part of the British Isles which left the British state has the worst of all worlds? Has Ireland got the worst of it?
Tavish Scott.
Speaking personally, but I take the wider, the wider and interesting political point that Ms MacDonald's making. I also want to just say that for the future, I hope we can move away in terms of what we want for Scotland from a centralised nationalist state, because that's what we've had under the SNP, a centralised state, to a decentralised state that encourages local decision-making and moves in a much more positive way to an exciting vision where local people are involved in the decision decisions that they want. That's the kind of Liberal Democrat future I'd like to see across Scotland. I do not and will never support institutions of state like the centralised police force that we now have, and we saw a report like that came out of Audit Scotland just yesterday, which showed why I was right at that time to oppose that bad measure that has been introduced by this current government. But I would rather, Presiding Officer, that we debated those issues and had a proper and robust discussion about those issues than spent all our time considering our Constitution. May I finish with Malcolm Chisholm's very fair observation that we must all, whatever the result, however our people decide as to where they wish to go, after that determination takes place in September next year, consider that it will be our responsibility, whatever that result, to work constructively together on the future of our nation.
Thank you very much. I now have a number of other members wishing to contribute, so speeches of between 4 to 6 minutes. Jamie Hepburn, to be followed by Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, President Officer. I have to say I didn't plan on beginning by disappointing Tavish Scott, but I found myself in the position of doing so because I am going to bandy about a certain term, because I do believe that today is a historic occasion. I think putting in place the framework by which the people of our country get to decide their future, whatever anyone thinks of what that future may be, surely we could all recognise the historic significance of today, notwithstanding what else has happened in the world and matters that concern us all. Of course, I'm describing today as a historic occasion. I think it is, but it does mark the end of the focus on procedural matters as it relates to the referendum. There's been some criticism previously that we've been too focused on procedure. I suppose we had to be so by necessity. Now we can focus by and large on the issues involved in the debate on Scotland's future, that debate ahead of us, and that debate that many, I suppose most of us, have already been engaged in. I hope to say a little bit about that later, but I think it probably is right to focus a little bit more on process and the process we've gone through to get to this place today. I think we have to recognise that we were previously in a different place than where we are now. At stage one of this bill, the entire Parliament came together to agree its principles. I'm not sure yet, none of us know yet what will happen tonight, but I rather hope that we will all do likewise and agree this bill. So we all now accept that it is right that Scotland has a referendum. That has not always been the case. I want to turn to what the leaders of other parties had said previously. Ian Gray in the Times on the 3rd of September 2009 spoke against us having a referendum. Tavish Scott opposed a referendum. He was quoted in Scotsman on 1st December 2009. I will neither vote for independence nor will I facilitate it. And Annabel Goldie in the Scotsman the same day talked of the Scottish Government ditching their attempts to hold a referendum. So previously anti-independence parties were anti-referendum parties, and I don't think any of us should fear putting this question to the people, and I very much welcome the change in stance we have seen. I recognise those parties continue to oppose independence, but welcome their support for the referendum now. And another area of process I want to touch on very quickly is the role of the Electoral Commission. There had previously been some concern that the Scottish Government would ignore the findings of the Referendum Commission, demanding that they signed up to them before the Electoral Commission had even announced what their findings were. Well, we now know, of course, the Scottish Government signed up to those recommendations reflected in the bill before us, and ends the nonsense of the accusations made previously. I firmly believe that this bill will deliver a fair referendum for the people of Scotland. President Officer, the SNP is accused consistently in this place of having an obsession with independence. I would briefly reflect on the fact that invariably independence is raised most often and most frequently in debate and questioning of the Scottish Government by our opponents. It's somewhat ironic that we are the ones that are accused of having such an obsession. I can certainly say for my own part, I am not actually obsessed by independence. I'm not obsessed by the trappings of statehood. I'm actually obsessed by making Scotland a better place for my children. I want to see a Scotland that can tackle the problems of intergenerational poverty, helping those who have the best of no world, let alone the best of both worlds. I want to see us tackling the problem of young people having to seek opportunities elsewhere, leaving Scotland because the opportunities don't exist here. I want to see us avoiding the squandering of our resources. And I thought Ian McWhirter had a very interesting column in the Herald newspaper today about the consequences of allowing Westminster to continue to use our resources to underwrite their agenda that we have not backed at the ballot box. I want to see us tackling our voicelessness in the world. I want to see Scotland a more confident place, and above all, I want to ensure that Scotland always gets the government that reflects its priorities and values of the people here. Now, I appreciate and I agree with Malcolm Chisholm's point that many of these objectives are shared across the parties, but from my position, and I know others in here, I firmly believe we need independence to achieve that list of ambitions I have set out. Presiding Officer, if we see a yes vote next year, I firmly believe that my children and my grandchildren, should I have any, will grow up asking whatever was at question. For them, independence will be normal, just as it is for most countries. But I also hope they'll be growing up in a better Scotland. And of course that depends on who is elected, who forms the government of the day. But I believe independence gives us the chance of a better country. This week's vote in the bedroom tax at Westminster demonstrates why I believe that to be the case. 15 of 59 Scottish MPs did not bother to vote in that debate, Presiding Officer. That is almost a quarter of Scottish representatives at Westminster on an issue causing great concern that is raised regularly here. Can we imagine the circumstances, Presiding Officer, on an issue of that importance when a quarter of members of this legislature would not bother to turn up? I cannot conceive of those circumstances. And I agree with Alan Miller, the Chair of the Scottish Human Rights Commission, that he cannot conceive of the circumstance in which the Parliament would have even legislated for something as pernicious as the bedroom tax. One reason why I believe power over these matters should be invested here. I look forward to the debate ahead. Like Drew Smith, I hope it is a well-informed debate. I hope we get better than we saw yesterday from the Secretary of State for Scotland, where he asked about how much it will cost to set up a new Scottish state from scratch. We know, Presiding Officer, independence will not be year zero, as is Alistair Carmichael's inference. We know the difference that devolution has made. If we fully equip this Parliament with those powers currently reserved to Westminster, I know we can make a bigger difference. That will be the essence of our case ahead. I look forward to making it between now and the 18th of September, and above all, I look forward to securing that yes vote next year.
Thank you. I now call Linda Fabiani to be followed by Ken McIntosh.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Do you know what? I am absolutely delighted to be standing here today after putting through legislation allowing us to have a referendum on Scottish independence, because it's been an aspiration for so many people. And it's about having the right to elect a government of choice and thus influence policy and direction, and the decisions about Scotland's future being made by the people who care most about Scotland, the people of Scotland. You know, in parliamentary terms, it seems like it's been a long time coming. But as Drew Smith said, there's actually been many who have been campaigning for decades. And yes, we have been campaigning for decades, those of us who believe in independence, because when you have a vision, when you have a belief that things can indeed be better and fairer, then months, years and decades go past, and despite the scare stories, despite the tactics and ultimately Project Fear, the campaign continues. And over these decades that people have been campaigning, things have changed markedly in comparatively recent years. Devolution came here in 1999, and that's been good for Scotland. There are gains for people and families and communities when decisions are taken in Scotland. From early on in our reconvened Parliament, through successive governments, there have been gains, from free personal care to assistance for veterans, from the smoking ban to the rejection of the privatisation of the NHS in Scotland. The converse of that is that, in fact, there is a heavy cost when we leave decisions in the hands of Westminster. 76% of Scottish MPs voted against further austerity cuts in the 2010 finance budget, but they were still imposed in Scotland. 81% of Scottish MPs voted against the welfare cuts in the Welfare Benefits Uprating Bill. They were still imposed in Scotland. 67% of Scottish MPs voted against privatisation during the passage of the Postal Services Bill. We all know what's happening there. 60% of Scottish MPs voted against the replacement of Trident in 2007. Yet the UK is pressing ahead with new nuclear weapons. But the big thing, only 36% of voters in Scotland voted for the Tories and the Lib Dems, yet we get the coalition in Westminster with all the problems that has brought for Scotland, and with a lot more yet to come down the line. So, for me, that's why I have that aspiration for independence. It's about always getting the government that Scotland chooses, about putting Scotland's future in Scotland's hands. And our opponents like to go on about it all being about the Constitution, that we never talk about anything except the Constitution. But the reality is it's about so much more than that. Yes, it's about using the Constitution to have the ability to do more than mitigate the awful effects of welfare reform. I have the privilege of sitting on the Independence Referendum-Bill Committee. I don't consider it a privilege to have to sit on the Welfare Reform Committee when the only powers that we have are to try and scrabble about and get some money to create a Scottish Welfare Fund to mitigate the excesses of a government down south which does everything to deal with problems that they perceive to have in a part of the United Kingdom where all the money is drawn down towards. No, I don't think so. No. So it is about the ability to do so much more. It's about having the ability to create policies to suit those that they most affect. It's about having the same opportunities as citizens of other small, independent, successful European nations that think it is normal to take their own decisions and to look after their own people. I think that's normal. That's the way I want things to be. And I think this week illustrates perfectly why independence is not just about the Constitution, but the issues that affect Scots. Jamie Hepburn referred to it. At the start of the week here, there was a sense that Labour and its leader down south, Ed Miliband, had grasped the reality of the bedroom tax and was going to take the government on over this legislation. And apparently, even the Shadow Scottish Secretary, Margaret Curran, thought this was the case because she wrote to the Lib Dems to try and shame them into coming and voting with Labour to get rid of the bedroom tax. But, you know, on Tuesday, the reality became clear. Ed Miliband's agenda was just another Westminster game. We've had our fill of Westminster games. A deal had been done. The coalition knew they faced no threat. And back here in Scotland, people could only watch in disbelief. I, for one, am sick of it. No, thank you. I've heard enough over the years. I really don't want to hear
your last
anymore.
20 minutes, 20 seconds.
OK, I'll finish here, Presiding Officer. As is written on the Parliament wall out there, as Sir Walter Scott said, he said it of members of the Scottish Parliament, the previous Scottish Parliament, he said, "The people can I people them with stains when they aren't good bairns, but nobody's nails can reach the length of Lunnon." I think that's absolutely true. They play the games down there. We can do nothing but sit and watch and shake our heads in despair. When we started this journey, we wanted a referendum made in Scotland. With the passage of this bill, we have that. Now I want to see us use it to return the full powers this Parliament needs for Scotland's future and to take us all forward.
I now call Ken McIntosh to be followed by Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I want to make a brief contribution to the debate, really in the form of an appeal about the way we conduct ourselves in the forthcoming referendum. Before I do, though, can I first of all say thank you to all members for their work on the referendum bill. It is remarkable that, given the strong views that surround the referendum itself, this has been a relatively consensual process, perhaps the first and only consensual moment in the debate, so we should enjoy the occasion while it lasts. But one of the main purposes of the bill has been to set the regulatory framework around which the referendum campaign will be conducted. It has done a good job in that regard. But in the end, more important is our own behaviour and the example we set. Indeed, the Deputy First Minister put it best in her opening remarks at stage 1, when she called on all sides to conduct a debate over the next 12 months that is respectful of one another's deeply held views and devoid of rancour or abuse. I doubt any of us would disagree with that statement. And I would hope that the Minister would also in turn agree that it would not be acceptable for the Scottish Government to use its position to bully those who speak out against it. Now, I bring this up because at the beginning of this week, there was a particularly unfortunate story about a Scottish Government minister who was accused of bullying academics at Dundee University because of their views on independence. Now, I should say, first of all, I was surprised in this particular case, because I've always found the Minister in question to be a decent person. But the most important point is I wasn't surprised to read the story. Immediately, many other similar allegations of this kind sprang to mind. Clearly, all members here, if not necessarily the wider public, are aware of the behaviour of the so-called cybernats, from Mike Russell's infamous researcher all the way through to Ian Gray's treatment at the last election. And of course, it's not just politicians who are subject to personal invective for daring to express their views. Mr Doris.
I thank Mr McIntosh for giving way. He used the expression cybernats there, portraying one side of the independence debate, demonising them compared to the other side. Would you agree with me that there are voices in both sides of the independence debate that are deeply irresponsible, and to couch it in language that it's only one side and not the other is to take that tribal approach but your speech actually said you wished to reject?
McIntosh.
A point I will make later in my own speech. But it's not just politicians who are subject to personal invective. The Olympic cyclist Sir Chris Hoy, the comedian Susan Calman, have both found themselves inadvertently in the firing line. This government has developed an unfortunate reputation for trying to suppress or totally silence those who might hold an opposing view. And for those who do not work in politics, it is very difficult to deal with what can be very vitriolic criticism. The chief executive of Agreco, for example, not someone I would imagine easily intimidated, complained of unpleasant attacks and said explicitly that leading business figures would not speak out on independence for fear of the SNP pouring rains of bile and ire upon them. Now, Ruth Davidson reminded me of when Jim Wallace was bumped for Keith Brown at a Loganair anniversary dinner after the Scottish Government demanded a change. Now, that last one made me laugh. If the SNP think someone as pleasant and reasonable as Jim Wallace is the enemy, then they really need to get a new sense of perspective.
Curious to know when Ken McIntosh is going to get to the bit where he's going to be consensual in the way that he described at the start of his speech. At the moment, we're still waiting, and it's a bit, it's maybe not the tone that we would expect from Ken McIntosh.
And the point I'm making is it's not the tone we expect from this government. I think that there are people on all sides, but the government is in a position of power. The government holds power and it controls the debate. It sets the agenda for this Parliament, and it is particularly important for those who have power not to abuse that position. And that is the point I'm making. And the thing about it is that many, many examples sprung to my mind. It's not that I've had to search hard. These immediately came to mind as soon as I read the story earlier this week. But in the interest of balance, Presiding Officer, I am not going to pretend that politicians and supporters of other parties are angels. And I think we are all well aware of how easy it is to move from loyalty to your colleagues to tribalism and aggression. And, Presiding Officer, if you have corrected members often enough for incorrectly using the term you when referring to opposition members in parliamentary debate, to know how easy it is to move from objective political discussion to personal attack. Now, the worries I highlight matter at all times to this Parliament, but they particularly matter for this referendum because I think we all want it to be an inclusive discussion. There's already a huge amount of national and international interest in the referendum, and it's a vote which is expected to engage the whole of Scotland. The current estimates are that turnout will be far higher than in other elections, so we're going to engage with people who do not normally get involved in politics. Now, I speak as someone who supports votes for 16 and 17-year-olds for all elections. One of the main reasons I do is that I deeply worry that so many young people are not voting anymore. Surely the message we want to get across is that all views matter, that the political process is a way to engage and is not one to be decided by name-calling. Well, here is an opportunity to engage a whole new generation in the importance of decision-making, in taking control of their own affairs, whether that be through independence or, as I hope, through the powers and benefits of devolution, through the Scottish and Westminster Parliaments. It's up to us, to all of us, to ensure that it is a rewarding and fulfilling experience, not one to be fearful or anxious of. Now, one way of reassuring me, Presiding Officer, would be if the Minister would address the point that Drew Smith made earlier. What will be the formal process through which this Parliament can engage with stakeholders, take evidence and test the contentions in the White Paper in the coming months?
Can I put it to Ken McIntosh that that is a matter for the Parliament? It's a matter for the committees. I will welcome maximum scrutiny of the White Paper. It's going to be a wonderful document setting out the overwhelming case for Scottish independence. I look forward to scrutiny of it. But I can't imagine Ken McIntosh's reaction if I started to dictate to committees what the business should be.
Ken McIntosh.
Well, despite the terms in which that was put, I actually welcome the comments from the Deputy First Minister. It does imply that there will be a parliamentary process, and that's something to be welcomed. Presiding Officer, can I just finish? I do welcome that. I welcome
I really
the fact that
must ask you to wind up.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I just want to finish by thanking colleagues, and I look forward to a constructive debate over the next 307 days. Thank you.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Stuart Maxwell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. For my part, I am very privileged indeed to have been called to speak in the Stage 3 debate on the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill, and I do say the word privileged deliberately, Presiding Officer, for there are many people who would have given their eye teeth to be standing in my shoes here today, people who did indeed till the soil, and I pay tribute to each and every one of them, for this is indeed another historic day in the life of our Parliament and of our country, and how lucky we are, Presiding Officer, to be part of the independence generation. As a member of the Independence Referendum Bill Committee, I too would like to pay tribute to the clerks, whose sterling service has ensured that we have been able to progress our work with due attention, due diligence and expeditiously in good time. And I am also going to mention, of course, our excellent convener, as others have done, Bruce Crawford, MSP, because the way in which he chaired our committee, our weekly proceedings, was really exemplary. He chaired it with competence, with fairness, and I think importantly, and I think we would all agree across the parties, with good humour. With the likely passage of the referendum bill later today, Presiding Officer, I believe all of us can be assured that we have a referendum process designed in Scotland for Scotland, a process that is fair, that is clear and that has internationally recognised democratic best principles at its very heart. A process that has a clear date agreed for the holding of the referendum on 18 September next year, and a process that has a clear question agreed: should Scotland be an independent country? And that, indeed, Presiding Officer, is the key question each of us face. Not could Scotland be an independent country, for the answer to that question is quite clear. Scotland, as Scotland, would be one of the richest countries in the developed world. Rather, the question as encapsulated in the Independence Referendum Bill is, should Scotland be an independent country? And the answer to that question, Presiding Officer, I would submit, has to be yes. For how can we ensure that all of our vast resources are put to work for all of our people if we do not take control over our own destiny? How can we ensure that we always get the government we vote for if we continue to be subject to the discredited Westminster system? And how can we ensure that we are not part, as Claire Adamson rightly referred to, of the fourth most unequal society in the developed world if we fail to seize this historic opportunity that we have before us? For Presiding Officer, this is truly a once-in-a-lifetime chance. I believe that a new dawn indeed beckons for our country and for our people. And we have to decide, will we be content just to have the same old, or will we grasp this opportunity to build a better nation for future generations? I believe, Presiding Officer, that for all those who live and work in Scotland, the people who care most about Scotland, this is indeed the time to be bold. And this is the time to have confidence in yourself, in your family, in your community and in your country. And this is the time to vote yes. And in closing my remarks today, Presiding Officer, I know that there are other speakers. I would wish to, with the indulgence of the Chamber, refer, as I did in closing my remarks when I spoke at Stage 1. And that was to mention, again, a quote that my mother, Winnie Ewing, famously was attributed to having said, further to her sensational by-election victory in the Hamilton by-election in 1967 when she said, "Stop the world, Scotland wants to get on." Well, the world has been waiting patiently, Presiding Officer. The world is still waiting, and I truly believe that it will not be much longer now for Scotland to rejoin the world and the community of nations. Thank you very much.
Stuart Maxwell, followed by Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Like many others, I want to begin by thanking the convener for the work that he did in chairing the committee so well. But I also want to thank the clerks, particularly the witnesses who gave oral evidence and written evidence to the committee, and that, of course, was invaluable in our work in examining the bill. I want to also thank the committee advisers, who I think did a sterling job in helping us through the process, and, of course, Spice, who were also invaluable. But I want to pay particular attention to my fellow committee members. I think that we did a good job. I think we did a job which was full of respect for each other's positions and concentrated on the bill and the work that we had to do as a committee, despite our differences of opinion about the central question of on the referendum on independence itself. Now, many people have said this is indeed a historic day in terms of the passing of this bill. I have to say I agree. I think it is historic, but I also think it's not very exciting. And I don't mean that in a particularly bad way. I mean it because this whole process has been exceptionally well planned. The original bill that was put to the Parliament was a very well-drafted bill. And of course, although there has been amendments to it along the way, as we have taken through the process and examined that bill in great detail, the fact that it's not particularly exciting shows that it has been a well-planned bill, the government has done its job, and the committee has had a reasonably easy time in examining the process and the procedures contained within that bill. But, Presiding Officer, what a long way we have come since the 2011 election. And indeed the strident voices of the anti-independence parties who said they didn't support independence and they wouldn't support a process to bring it about. Well, I'm glad that those voices have changed. I'm glad that they have now decided that this is the right thing to do, and they now accept that the people of Scotland have the right to choose their own future. I'm just sad that thus far they have failed to extend that logic to supporting that right across everything else. Now, I cannot understand the logic of those who support Scotland having powers over health but not welfare, over justice but not defence, over local tax but not national tax. It doesn't make any sense. In my view, this arbitrary line drawn between devolved powers and reserved powers makes no sense whatsoever. But I can't help but reflect on the difference between the relatively constructive and straightforward process that has surrounded the passage of the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill and indeed the Franchise Bill, and the rather long and difficult debates, may I say, arguments that took place around the most recent Scotland Bill, and I also served on that committee as well. The fight to move us forward by 1 inch, by such a small amount that surrounded the Scotland Bill, far exceeded anything that has occurred during the passage of this bill. And it's interesting the fact that we spent decades trying to get this place established. We spent a relatively short amount of time on the second Scotland Bill, but it wasn't the most constructive discussion that I've ever experienced. And I have to say, despite the many protestations about support for devolution, the support for more devolution, the support for Home Rule amongst Tavish Scott's party, the fact is that every single additional power or every single amendment that was put forward by members of the SNP was voted down on every single occasion by those members who now say that they support extra powers and they support lots of new powers for the Parliament at some indistinct point in the future when I suppose they think we might be ready. However, there were some issues that I did want to mention around the bill that did raise some questions. The question of purdah came up during the committee's examination of the bill, and I very much welcome the clarity by the Deputy First Minister around this. We did have questions about when it would fall, how long it should be, and who indeed would be covered by it. But I think we're in the right place. The slight change at the end, even at this Stage 3 process, has actually led to, I think, us being at the right place with the length of purdah. I think it will cover the right organisations, and I don't think really we should be particularly concerned about that particular part of the bill. There was, of course, as others have mentioned, a great deal of debate about campaign rules, and particularly around spending limits. Again, I think we're in the right place. I think the level of 7,500 is the right, and I think the level of constrictions on organisations allows us to be sure that we have a transparent and fair process, but at the same time allows organisations across this country to get involved, to take part and be part of, yet again I'm going to say, a historic process that we are undertaking. Of course, we also had the question of designation for lead campaigners by the time that we reached the 16-week period of the referendum. And I think that was one of those questions that, frankly, I'm very pleased was cleared up at stage 2, because it would have been a rather strange state of affairs if we hadn't had those organisations in place that close to the referendum. Presiding Officer, I want to conclude my remarks by mentioning a conversation that I recently had with a woman from Slovenia who I met on a bus in Vilnius in Lithuania. Now, we got chatting because she recognised that obviously I wasn't from Lithuania. And I said that I was from Scotland, and of course she immediately said that she had heard that there might be a referendum on independence in Scotland. And she asked me if this was in fact correct. I confirmed indeed that it was true, and she was very excited by this prospect. She thought this was an amazing thing to be happening in Scotland. And she asked me a number of questions about the referendum and what was happening and who was saying what and what it would cover. And finally she asked me what I thought the result would be. What did the polls say, she said to me. So I asked her, what did she think the polls in Scotland would be saying? And she immediately said, without hesitation, and she had absolute confidence in this response, she said, 100% yes. 100% yes. And I said, no, I wish it was 100% yes. So she guessed, well, 90%, 80% yes. And I said, no, in fact. And I told her the latest poll result that was out just before I travelled to Lithuania. And she was completely and utterly dumbfounded. She said that in her country it was unimaginable.
I'm sorry, the member really needs to wind up.
Just concluding, Presiding Officer, thank you. It was unimaginable that there would not be a near unanimous support for running your own affairs. The fact that not being independent was unimaginable to that lady shows that, despite the scaremongering, independence is the normal state for peoples around the world. And it's time that the people of Scotland took control of their own affairs, and they can do so by voting yes next September.
Patrick Harvey, followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I, like others, begin by offering once again my thanks to everyone who's contributed to the committee's process as we move through stages 1 and 2 of our 2 bills. The process, as others have mentioned, has been broadly consensual. The tensions, the political tensions between supporters and opponents of independence were not completely absent, but they were tempered enough, constrained enough not to prevent us from doing our work effectively. Our convener chaired our proceedings with fairness and charm. Annabel Goldie always wore highly suitable shoes and consistently impressive on that score. And Tavish Scott tells us that he was on occasion in a minority of one. All I can say is I know that feeling. I do. In fact, I would go further and recommend that experience to every member of this chamber. Try it once or twice at least during your political careers. The fact that we were able to have this committee process in a broadly consensual manner has prompted many members to talk about the tone of our debate over the next 10 months and trying to have that in a respectful and a high-quality manner. To be sure, we don't always succeed at that. We should be able to disagree respectfully, and we don't always manage that in politics and between political parties. But I hope that we do return to that tone as often as we possibly can. And I think both sides, the yes and no campaigners in this referendum, if we're serious about trying to persuade undecided voters, we should aim for that respectful tone, because I think that's what undecided voters will listen to rather than a hostile and a polarised debate. Getting the legislation right, getting the rules of the game right on this referendum is hugely important. It's not only desirable, it's absolutely vital that we conduct this referendum with agreed rules in order to ensure that whichever side comes out with the results they didn't want is willing to accept the result, and that we can have a referendum that's meaningful. Losers' consent is going to be so important. The aftermath, the jubilation on one side and the feelings of defeat and disappointment on the other will be tough enough as a circumstance in which Scottish politics will have to come together again. That'll be tough enough. We can't afford to add to that complexity with a process that's been contentious. So I'm very, very glad that we've got a bill that it seems all sides are happy with. Many of the issues were successfully addressed, indeed, by the agreement between the Scottish and UK government, and that agreement set the initial tone that allowed this broadly consensual committee process to follow. What comes next? The implementation. Well, I believe that there was a good degree of confidence among the committee members, and I hope that there is amongst all MSPs, in the mechanics and the administration. I think we have a good degree of confidence that this referendum will be conducted to a high standard and that we will see a process which carries the confidence of the country. What we also need is compelling political arguments, and I would say that about both sides. I want a debate where both sides bring compelling and testing arguments to the debate. The White Paper, which the Government will publish soon, will no doubt set out the current Scottish Government's position in great depth. Perhaps in slightly less depth, my own party tomorrow will be launching its campaign for a Green Yes vote. Although I have to admit that certain tender heads will still be wondering about our choice of date after the works night out, the Green Party will set out its own case for a yes vote. The Radical Independence Conference later in the month will also set out another wide range of views on the left of Scottish politics and some of the compelling arguments that perhaps aren't heard in this chamber will be heard at that conference. We need, and I would welcome, the same breadth, the same depth and passion on the no side of this argument as well. I challenge the idea that Scotland is on pause. I think, in fact, that this has been one of the most exciting and creative times, not always in this chamber, but in wider political debate. Organisations, whether they're strictly neutral, but asking questions of both sides and setting out their agenda for the possibilities of independence, I think this has been one of the most creative times that I can remember in Scottish politics. And we should conduct it in that level so that whichever result the Scottish people choose, we have the momentum to take some of those creative ideas forward as well as we can. I believe that we'll be better placed to put them into practice if we get a yes vote, but I want that debate on both sides to be at that standard. Above all, driving up participation. If we have that compelling, creative and imaginative argument, I think we will see a very strong turnout. The result, I think everybody agrees, should not be contingent on an arbitrary, fixed level of turnout. But that's not to say that turnout doesn't matter. Scotland's political culture will be so much healthier if we've all taken part in this decision together. Finally, Presiding Officer, can I echo the sentiments that several other members have said, that the committee, the Independence Referendum-Bill Committee, should, I believe, expand its remit and take evidence on the White Paper. There'll be aspects that subject committees want to look at, but the constitutional transitional questions also needs scrutiny, and I think all sides should be willing to have that debate on the record in committee over the coming months. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
I now have a number of speakers, so from here on in, we're going to go with 4 minutes, and hopefully we can get through everybody. Stuart Millen, followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thanks for calling to speak on this historic day for this Scottish Parliament. It has been a privilege being a member of the Referendum-Bill Committee, and I would like to also pass on my thanks to the fellow members of the committee, to the advisers, to the clerking team, and also to all those who gave evidence to the committee. Certainly one of the comments that has run through this bill process has been the issue of the bill and the approach to it being beyond reproach, whatever the outcome next September. And no matter which way members vote tonight, no matter which way the electorate vote next September, this bill process has been transparent, it's been inclusive and it's been clear. Indeed, the briefing that we received from the Electoral Commission for today's Stage 3 debate states that our overall view is that the bill, as amended, currently meets this standard and reflects many of the recommendations that we made. And that standard is the issue of the absolute clarity on the roles and responsibilities of those administering the referendum. Today, we will pass this Scottish Independence Referendum Bill, and I welcome Labour's commitment to vote yes tonight. Hopefully I can encourage them to vote yes maybe next September as well. But this takes a stage closer to the debate, to the day when I hope that the people of Scotland will choose to take responsibility for their own lives and also for the future of Scotland. Like everyone in this chamber, I will campaign for what I believe in. I respect the fact that others in the chamber have their own particular position, which I obviously disagree with, but they are entitled to their own position. The challenge for all of us from both sides of the debate is to rise to the occasion, to engender debate, to foster a greater understanding of the political process and the opportunity to encourage more people to take part in this, and also for future elections. But also, we have to provide a clear picture of a Scotland if it's a yes vote or even if it's a no vote on the 18th of September. Now, I look forward to the publication of the White Paper on the 26th of November, and also look forward to reading the offerings from the no campaign groups encouraging a no vote and the consequences for Scotland if it is a no vote. And certainly, I'd like to acknowledge the comments from Tavish Scott earlier and his contribution regarding that point. This referendum provides the people of Scotland with the choice to make history. There can be no bigger political decision for an electorate than to decide on the political future of a nation. And I look forward to Friday the 19th of September 2014, watching the rebirth of a nation and knowing that I have played a part in that. Also knowing that my 6-year-old daughter has helped, and also the many friends and fellow nationalists who have helped as well, and also those who are no longer with us will have done their part in keeping the independence flame burning through some tough times for the national movement. The phrase of standing on the shoulders of giants can be utilised all too freely. Today, however, we in these benches are standing on those shoulders. We have a responsibility to our lost friends, their family and colleagues to deliver our shared dream, an independent Scotland, to provide a better future and opportunities for our future generations. Presiding Officer, I am delighted to be voting yes tonight, and also I cannot wait to vote yes on the 18th of September 2014. Thank you.
Bob Doris, followed by Margot MacDonald.
Presiding Officer, I'm privileged to be speaking in this afternoon's Scotland Bill debate. I am sure we will come together at 5 p.m. this afternoon to vote for a referendum on Scotland's future. To ask that most fundamental of democratic principles, to ask us to choose self-government, I firmly believe that when the people of Scotland are asked if we should be an independent country, they will say a resounding yes. I very much welcome the non-tribal and constructive approach, as we've heard this afternoon, that the Scotland Bill Committee took to scrutinising this piece of legislation, and I very much hope that all parties, and indeed those of no party political persuasion, can all take a non-tribal and constructive approach to debate that will now follow and intensify. I'd like to refer, Presiding Officer, to a comment made at today's First Minister's questions about the future of Scotland when independent. And that was one made by Joanne Lamont, who used the expression, "What's the plan B?" She said that today at First Minister's questions. In other words, what would any party do if it didn't get its way? So, Presiding Officer, as the Scottish Government publishes its White Paper on independence in the days ahead, the certainty about what Scotland will look like and aspire to should an SNP government be returned in an independent Scotland will be made clear for those 2016 elections with a yes vote. And to that plan B, without independence, a commitment to continue to stand up for Scotland's interests at every opportunity, and if given the honour to continue to be a responsible Scottish Government. Presiding Officer, Plan B's cut both ways. The Labour Party contend that the only way to protect Scotland's interests is to elect a UK Labour Party to a Westminster Government, which rarely, if ever, has Scotland on its radar, never mind as a priority. Presiding Officer, the Labour Party Plan A includes nuclear weapons, it includes nuclear power, it includes draining our oil and gas and other natural resources, and it includes sticking to Tory capital cuts to Scotland. That's the Plan A, and that's a weak and ineffective proposition to put to the Scottish people. But what about the Plan B, presiding officer? The Plan B includes even more welfare reform, sticking to the bedroom tax, and, do you know, presiding officer, I was going to list through lots of more things Plan B would mean, but actually the Labour Party would do them also if elected to a UK government, quite frankly. So Plan A is not satisfactory for the Scottish people, and Plan B is to play Russian roulette with Scotland's future, to let the Tories loose on Scotland with a future UK Tory government. That's unacceptable, and that's a reason why this Scotland Bill must be passed and why the Scottish people must vote yes in that independence referendum. Let me just say a couple of obvious things in my work in this Parliament that tells me on a very elementary basis why we need independence. Firstly, as Deputy Convener of the Health Committee, every time there's a reform, a disinvestment from the health service in England of £1 million, our committee is looking at £9,000 to £8,000 less spent in the Scottish Health Service. That's simply unacceptable. And on a very local level, let me tell you something else that's unacceptable. A wonderful local group called Rosemount Works, who work with vulnerable young people furthest away from the labour market, cannot get some young people into education courses because of UK benefit rules. They won't change it, but Angela Constance would change it if she could. That's why I want independence, not as an end in itself, but for the future of Scotland's young people, and I very much hope Parliament comes together to take that next step in the journey to Scottish self-determination.
Margot MacDonald, followed by Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Deputy First Minister said that this was a large and complex piece of legislation. Fair enough, but who's caring about that? What we're caring about is the central core of it. It's the opportunity for Scots to face and answer the core question that's running throughout all of our politics. And the bill gives us the chance to choose a future of which the boundaries and the aspirations and the achievements of Scots will be determined by the Scots themselves, with no excuse to blame anybody else. Now, other Scots feel that the future is somehow a barter. If we stay a region of the United Kingdom, there will be a safety net. Safety nets can fail as well. And if you fall into the safety net of the circus, you're not as big a draw as you are if you try it without the safety net. I'm for going without the safety net because we've got everything that we need to do that. Others see Scotland, if not ourselves alone, certainly ourselves alongside other countries and the equal legally of any other country in the world. And this is very important for our self-image because it will change from being that of the regionalist and that of the people who are always that wee bit behind the fashion, a wee bit behind the times, to being leaders, the way other small countries are. And it's not just the normal small countries that we always quote. Think about Singapore, think what they did. Now, we don't like the way they did it, but think what they did with the numbers and the positioning that they had. So there's lots of other examples that we can take. I know that I'll never, ever regret voting yes. This is my legacy to our grandchildren. There's 10 of them, and we'll be expecting them to pick up from where we leave off. We'll have given them the opportunity to go for the highest standards of achievement, highest standards of humanity, just the best. That's what they'll aim for if I vote yes, and that's why I'll never regret voting yes. But I wonder how the people that we call the unionists, and most of them aren't unionists, of course, they're just on the opposite side of the chamber from this one. I wonder how they feel about their legacy. We know what their legacy is now. It's 17 years more of fuel prices pitched higher than inflation. It's heaven knows how many years more of austerity. It's a crippling of ambition. It's a squeezing down of what we might aspire to in Scotland. That's the legacy that you take with you with the union. And if you don't, then let's hear what the alternatives are, because there have been precious little alternatives voiced in this debate so far. Finally, can I ask people who are trying to be imaginative about what would come post-independence, about the new relationships and partnerships that would be struck, Just have a sense of context, have a sense of timing. It doesn't all happen at the one time. And one thing can happen the week after, and another thing will take 10 years. And you've got to be sensitive to that, because firstly, you lack credibility if you don't get it right, and secondly, you frighten the horses. No, the opponents, I mean. But people ask if they should vote for independence or union with their hearts or their heads. Well, like all Scots, their hearts in the right place, so it'll be their heads. They'll probably dictate that they should not vote themselves into poverty, fuel poverty, as I've talked about, and minority. This is what, really, if you think about it, your head will tell you, not your heart. Your heart knows that Scottish needs nothing else to think about. But if you think
Ms MacDonald.
If you think about your interest and your family's interest in the future, you will vote with your head, you'll vote yes, and you'll vote for an independent Scotland.
Sandra White, followed by George Adam.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm not a member of the committee, but can I thank all members of the committee and the Collapse for, I think, the excellent work that they have done and the hours that they put into this bill. I stand here very proud to be one of the people in this Parliament who are able here today to vote yes on this bill and vote yes in September next year. And can I echo my colleague Stuart McMillan, of the many, many people, too many to mention, who basically we are standing on the shoulder of giants who are not here to see this. But if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be here today debating this just now, and I really do pay tribute to them, and I think everyone probably knows many of them that I mean. Margaret MacDonald's contribution was excellent. We've all seen what's happened in Scotland. Scotland has absolutely flourished under devolution, particularly since 2007, and I don't think anyone can absolutely deny that. The statesmanship of the First Minister, the actual economics that he's brought to this country is far beyond any other Prime Minister, never mind any other First Minister or Administrator. And I think that's something that, unfortunately, the Labour Party in particular, I hear them from the sidelines. For some reason, they just can't seem to, what's the Scottish word for it? Stomach it? They just cannot seem to stomach the fact that someone who does not agree with them, i.e. the Union, can be so successful for this Parliament and bring so many people here from across the world to this Parliament. The greatest number of people, ambassadors, et al., coming to visit this Parliament. I think that's something we should all be proud of, and yet you can't get through this wall that just because it's the SNP that's did it, it can't be good for the Parliament of Scotland. And it makes me angry, yeah, but it makes me very, very sad. But I'll tell you one thing that makes me even sadder, is what comes out, and Duncan Beale is probably one of the ones, as well as many others, what comes out from those benches opposite. We're talking about shipbuilding, and they tell people to vote no. If they don't vote no, the yards will go away from the Clyde. Well, let's just read what BAE Systems said about that. The Ministry of Defence agrees that Glasgow is the most effective location to build Type 26 ships. BAE Systems has agreed with the UK Ministry of Defence that Glasgow will be the most effective location for the manufacture of future Type 26 ships. The company proposes to consolidate its shipbuilding operations in Glasgow. And do you know why they're doing it? They've also said because it's the most workforce, the one that's got the most experience. Look at all the other countries in the world. We don't just need to get Ministry of Defence orders. We can build other ships. We can lead this nation. But there, once again, these people see doom and failure at every single corner. It's a disgrace. And if I could I wanted to give more time to this one. Presiding Officer, the one thing that really saddened me, even more so, as we speak, there's a lady in Pollock who's been evicted from her house because of the bedroom tax. These people here said they would protect these people, protect their constituents, and they couldn't even turn up for a vote. Shame on you! Shame on you! Thank you.
George Adam, followed by Rob Gibson.
Done. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm not on the committee, but I commend their hard work in this report, and I welcome this debate and the debate we're going to have within our own communities, because that's what this debate is all about. It's about what we can do for our communities and what independence offers our communities. For me, I've been involved in politics for longer than I care to remember. And when I ask myself, my reasons, my motivations for then are the same as what they are now, is to actually try and make a change, make a difference, make people's lives better. And that's the reason why I support independence. You know, one of the things that I believe in is, and one of the things that's lacking from the opposition speeches is, where's their vision? Where's their idea of actually taking on the challenges head on and taking on responsibility and seeing what we can do? And something that's glaringly missing from their speeches, the dare to actually hope for a better future. Where is the idea? Is it wrong to actually want to work towards trying to make the country better? Is it wrong to actually look at all the people in their own communities and offer them something that can make a difference, instead of sitting here having academic debates that they continue to have either here in Westminster when they can be bothered to turn up to vote? We need to actually do something that will make a difference in the real world, with real people, because everything that I actually talk about when I'm talking about the debate is about the people that I represent. And I think most of us in here should look at that and actually believe that that is the way we have to go. And my motivations, like Jamie Hepburn, it's making a better life for our children and our nation. But I look at my own children, and apart from feeling old, I also can I say what I want so much from them. I want them to actually have the ambition to be everything that they possibly can be. I want them to look to the future without the Scottish cringe, who actually believe that they can achieve anything they want. That's what I want, and I think some of the opposition members should just start to feel more confident about themselves. Be confident about themselves. We can all be like this as well, because it's about actually having the confidence to have the powers here and have the debate in this chamber. I want to have the debate. I don't want to have debates like this when we're arguing at opposite ends of the chamber about whether we should be part of a union that's well past its sell-by date or whether we should be part of a new dynamic Scotland. I want to have a debate about what we're going to do about it, and that's what we need, the powers of independence. And the sooner the opposition members think that way and start to discuss things that way, then we can move our nation forward. That's what the public are wanting. They're wanting us to actually discuss about Scotland's future and move things forward, not just sit here having academic debates. But what is the cost of Westminster? The cost of Westminster to us is more austerity. 76% of Scottish MPs voted against further austerity cuts in the 2010 Finance Bill, but it was imposed anyway. That's the cost of the Union. The Scottish Government budgets of 11% in real terms over 5 years and capital spending by 26 cuts given to us by the Union. This is what the Union offers Scotland. It doesn't offer us any ambition. It doesn't offer us the future that we all want for our children and others. But what it does offer us is Trident-on-the-Clyde, a cost of £163 million per year. You know, the other thing is, when you take the cost of that, that alone could pay for 4,500 teachers if you wanted, 1,500 consultants, 33 primary schools, winding up, 7 secondary schools. These are the debates we should be having. We should be talking about what we should do with that money and how we could build a better Scotland. And the sooner the opposition remember that, that's when Scotland will be able to say we are moving forward.
I now call Rob Gibson. I can give you 3 minutes, Mr Gibson.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I have been a member of the committee which has brought us this bill and which has brought us the opportunity. The Electoral Commission, which I pursued for their detailed plan, has agreed that they are pleased that the Scottish Government has accepted many of the recommendations that they made in the report following the referendums in 2011. In other words, this is an excellent way forward for a referendum in the eyes of our people and in the eyes of the world. But, Presiding Officer, today's debate sums up something of the problem that this country has. Project Fear has failed to put up speakers on the side which says no. Most of the speakers in this debate have been supporting the bill and supporting independence. Why won't they come out and argue the positive case for what they believe? Because this is the place where they should be doing that. That positive case is not there. And I believe the reason for it is because it's the Unionists, it's the Westminster rule that has put Scotland on pause. Not anything that happened in this government. It was the Westminster government which handled the crash so badly. It's the Westminster government which is unpicking the glue on what was the United Kingdom by dismantling the health service, by going for nuclear weapons, by deciding that we're going to have nuclear power stations no matter what we want. But all these issues will be able to be debated in the course of the referendum. All these issues are there for us to make sure that the people in Scotland have a fair chance. But fundamentally, we know on this side of the case that the Scots, when they do vote yes, will always get the government they want. So as far as I'm concerned, Scotland's going to be an exciting place to come to next year. Commonwealth Games, Homecoming, the Ryder Cup, and indeed to see a new nation ready to take its place with the nations of the world. Support.
Thank you, Mr Gibson. We now move to the wind-up speeches. I call Annabel Goldie. Ms Goldie, you've got 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just reverting back to my opening speech, Deputy First Minister, there were some questions I raised, and I very much hope... Oh, Mr Swinney's back amongst us having a wee chat. Want to take an intervention?
Mr Swinney.
I'm always very ready to come to the rescue of Baroness Goldie when she's getting into trouble. If she's having difficulty filling the 4 minutes, perhaps she could tell us what propositions the Conservative Party is going to advance to improve the governance of Scotland, given the paltry failure that they've had over the many years to try to deliver any form of stronger self-government for the people of Scotland.
Well, it's,
Annabel Goldie.
It's a very simple proposition. It's called Stay Within the United Kingdom. Can I just say to the Deputy First Minister...
Order.
Can I say to the Deputy First Minister in all seriousness, I did raise some questions at the beginning, and I'd be very grateful if she could respond to these. Now, she quite rightly referred to the Edinburgh Agreement. It was historic. It was pivotal, and I think it was an exemplar of how a Westminster government and a devolved government can work together. Deputy First Minister says that reflects what can happen after a yes vote. I say it as a shining example of how devolution can continue to work within the United Kingdom following a no vote. Now, Sandra White uttered the memorable phrase, "Scotland has flourished under devolution." Let us all pin that to our lapels and not let it be forgotten. The Deputy First Minister said that the White Paper will present an overwhelming case for independence. And I ask, should that case not have been made by now? It's certainly been a long time coming. So I'll reserve judgment on the White Paper. I'll leave the Deputy First Minister's enthusiasm to the Deputy First Minister. But she did make an important point, the language and the conduct of the debate. And indeed, Bruce Crawford and I and others referred to this at stage 1. And I was very struck by what Bruce Crawford said today, as I was by Malcolm Chisholm, Ken McIntosh and Patrick Harvey. This is not about being consensual, Presiding Officer. How could it be? That would be a complete intellectual confusion. There will be passion, there will be robustness, there will be fire, flair and verve. They all have their place. But intimidation, jeering and sneering do not under any circumstances. And on the merits of, or demerits of the argument, assertion is not fact, and repeated platitudes are not evidence. And I know the public wants facts, and I know the public wants evidence. And I know the public wants language which is clear, and it wants information and explanation, not provocation and confrontation. Now, like others, I've been attending public meetings, and this may be uncomfortable for the SNP. What has emerged is that more is known about the partnership, which is the United Kingdom, than is known about separation. People understand what the United Kingdom is, they understand what it means, they understand what it has done. which no doubt explains the polls to which Mr Maxwell referred.
Order.
And while some may have no time for the United Kingdom, find nothing good in it, others do see virtues. And I'm very tight for time, having given Mr Swinney a very generous intervention. Others do see virtue. They do see virtue in the capacity of the United Kingdom to influence, whether that's our permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council, whether that's being in the G7 and G8 group of countries, or, as Tavish Scott said, how we influence on the global stage. People understand that because they see it happening. And they very particularly understand the meaning and significance of our British Armed Forces. The recent Remembrance commemorations pointedly underscore that. And they understand what the pound is. They want the pound. They know that within the United Kingdom that's their currency, and they have it. All of which means that the separation case and the White Paper face a very significant challenge, because that paper needs to set out the case for separation, not just produce in detail the virtues of the argument that they maintain are there, but they need to actually produce the blueprint as to how this is going to work. So, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, there is a huge sentiment in Scotland, shared by myself and hundreds of thousands of other people, and it's the polar opposite to that expressed by Linda Fabiani and Annabel Ewing. And it is that people like being part of the United Kingdom. They regard it as positive. And contrary to what they may passionately argue, there are hundreds of thousands of non-SNP supporters across Scotland who want to keep the United Kingdom, and they place that above party politics. And that is why I'm confident that next September people will vote for the proven positive partnership which is the United Kingdom, and they will reject separation.
I now call on Lewis MacDonald. Mr MacDonald, you've got 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This is a procedural bill. It has been concluded on the basis of a high degree of consensus, and not least in the record progress on amendments this afternoon, and it will be passed without substantial division in a few minutes' time. But of course that is only part of the story. The price we've paid this afternoon for our willingness to compromise on amendments has been an endless queue of what I might generously describe as excited SNP speakers. Many of whom made good points, some of whom perhaps less so. What was perhaps most surprising was when Rob Gibson at the end decided to criticise us for indulging these speakers, perhaps a sign of things to come. But independence, of course, matters to the SNP. We know that, we expect that, that's part of the deal. But for those of us who believe that Scotland's best future to be part of the Union, this referendum bill matters too. Next year's vote, of course, represents, in our view, an opportunity to reaffirm Scotland's firmest and long-standing friendships, and at the same time to move our country's story on to a new phase. And whether members believe that new phase is about the maturity of devolution, which has rightly been praised from all sides this afternoon, or whether they believe it's about independence, it is important that we get the ground rules right for the referendum campaign and agreed by all sides. Experience in other referendums shows that the result of the poll will be accepted by all sides if all parties are engaged in defining who should be asked what and how.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank Mr MacDonald for giving way. Obviously, we're going to have the White Paper on the 26th of this month, which is going to set out the SNP government's vision for independence. Mr MacDonald talked about the new phase for devolution. Are the Labour Party and the other unionist parties actually going to put their vision for this new phase of the Union to the people before that referendum?
Lewis MacDonald.
I can promise Kevin Stewart that Labour's plans for devolution will not be a secret and will indeed be made public at an early date.
Order.
I am glad to hear the party of government recognises the party that created the Scottish Parliament and is looking to us for a lead on the next phase of devolution. That, of course, is only as it should be. But now in this process we have agreement on how we go forward on the referendum. And what we have agreed is broadly to follow the approach taken by the Electoral Commission in ensuring fairness and transparency in elections and referendums across the UK. And I was reminded at stage 2 that my own submission to the Scottish Government's consultation said we should follow the Electoral Commission's lead on the rules governing the conduct of the referendum. And the bill as amended largely does so, with the one exception of absent voting. Indeed, I raised some concerns about that exception earlier this afternoon, and although Nicola Sturgeon did not accept my point, I am glad that I did so. I am, after all, as interested as any other member in how to get out the vote at elections, not just at the referendum, and it was a unique experience to be advised on how to do it better by Kevin Stewart. I am, of course, grateful, and I will bear his advice in mind for future reference. But on absent voting, the genuinely novel aspects of the voting system will require specific guidance and impose new burdens. But I do believe that the counting and electoral registration officers will be well able to meet those demands. The other area of debate has been around spending to a common plan, where we thought the bill could quite reasonably be strengthened to ensure transparency and to avoid campaigning by proxy through organisations invented for that purpose. Again, the issue has been one of balance between enabling participation by as many campaigners as possible and ensuring that no one seeks to mislead voters. Ministers have acknowledged the importance of getting that balance right, although, unlike others, they believe the bill achieves that as it now stands. It will now be all the more important that the Electoral Commission builds on the framework provided by the bill and brings forward clear guidance on how campaigners should account for work done as part of a common plan. That way, the letter of the law will be clearly understood, and hopefully the spirit of it will be respected as well. So, the stage is set, the rules are clear, and those charged with ensuring a fair and transparent process know what tools they will have to hand to carry out their tasks. Now the country will decide, and the world will be watching. Nobody who has been involved at any stage in this process could doubt its significance. And that's why it is right that so many members have said this debate should be conducted in a respectful manner. But I think it's important to say that Scottish men and women taking part in this debate should not lose the right to that respect.
The members in his last minute, he is not giving way.
Scottish men and women should not lose the right to that respect on the basis that they are elected members of the Westminster Parliament. Those rules apply there too. But it is not enough for Parliament to set the stage. It is also our job as members to scrutinise legislation, as we have done, and to scrutinise the wider policy and actions of the Scottish Government. That is why we raised the issue of scrutiny of the White Paper at stage 1, and why we now recognise that we have come to the point where the referendum rules have been settled and decisions must soon be made about scrutiny of the White Paper. There is a case to be made for that to be done by a Committee of Parliament constituted in a similar way to the Referendum-Bill. If that is not supported by ministers, I hope they will tell us how else they wish to proceed so that Parliament as a whole can come to a view. The people of Scotland have a momentous decision to make, which we have enabled by proceedings on this bill. Parliament has a role over the next few months in ensuring that the proposals on which people will vote have been examined and interrogated as we would for any other measure. That, after all, is what a Parliament is for, and it is through Parliament that the people of Scotland will continue to hold ministers to account both before and after the referendum.
I now call on Nicola Sturgeon to wind up the debate. Deputy First Minister, you have 8 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This has been an interesting and, in the main, good-natured debate. It has had its surreal moments, it's fair to say. Annabel Goldie transported us back to her first primary school dance and the awakening of her awareness of the male of the species. Unfortunately, she returned to talking about the Referendum-Bill, and we didn't get to hear how that evening ended, but perhaps on another occasion. She also, though, raised a serious question for me about the timing and extent of pre-referendum guidance. She'll recall that I wrote to the Bill Committee on the 22nd of June, setting out the list of public bodies subject to the 28-day pre-referendum restrictions. The exact timing for the issuing of that guidance is yet to be decided, but it will be issued in good time to allow staff to familiarise themselves with it. And I've also previously said that we will send a copy of the guidance to the Referendum-Bill Committee, so I hope that answers Annabel Goldie's point. Bruce Crawford, I thought, made a fine speech, setting out in very simple but very powerful terms the case for Scotland becoming an independent country. And I want to take again today the opportunity to place on record my gratitude and that of the Scottish Government to Bruce Crawford for the enormous role he's played in this process. There have been many very fine speeches in this debate today. Malcolm Chisholm, Stuart Maxwell, Patrick Harvey, Stuart McMillan, Bob Doris, Margot MacDonald, Sandra White, George Adam, Rob Gibson, Claire Adamson, Linda Fabiani. Wonderful speeches, and I have to say some of the speeches have been of the highest quality. There's two in particular I want to single out. Annabel Ewing. Because Annabel spoke about her mother. And when I come to press my button in a few minutes' time, there will be many people in my mind who have contributed so much to bringing us to the point that we are at today. And one of the people in my mind will be Annabel's mother, the fine, fantastic Winnie Ewing. When Winnie opened this Parliament, she reminded us that we lost our independence back in March 1707. If we vote yes next year, then in March 2016 we can regain our independence. And I know that there will be nobody happier on that day than Winnie Ewing, and we pay tribute to her and to others today. Very briefly.
Mark MacDonald. I thank the Cabinet Secretary. I had hoped to speak in the debate, but one of the people who ought to be here with us today to press their voting button is Brian Adam, who was elected in 2011. And I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary would want to record her wishes that Brian were still with us today to be able to vote for the referendum bill at 5 o'clock.
I dearly wish that Brian Adams was with us today, and I dearly wish that there were many other people with us today. But I'm sure that we all of us, in enabling the people of Scotland to vote in a referendum, do them and their memories justice. The other speech I wanted to highlight today was that of Jamie Hepburn, because I thought Jamie made a very profound point, and I think in doing so he spoke for all of us in these benches, because he said very clearly that for us independence is not an end in itself, it is a means to an end. And that end is a better Scotland. And it struck me as Jamie was speaking that those who actually can be accused in this debate of being blinded by constitutional arguments are in fact those on the Labour benches. Because you see, in truth, on so many social and economic issues, there's actually more that unites the SNP and Labour than there is that divides us. And yet Labour is so wedded to the Westminster system that they would rather have a Tory government dismantling our welfare state than have an independent government doing something about inequality. And that is a position, Presiding Officer, that I think over these next few months will fall apart under the weight of its own absurdity, as more and more Labour voters realise that the way to achieve their political aspirations is not to remain with Westminster, it is to vote yes and to have Scotland become an independent country. And that takes me to the contribution of Drew Smith. Now, I thought Drew Smith started very well in his contribution with the proud declaration that he will be voting yes at decision time this afternoon. I think Drew Smith might find that he gets a taste for voting yes. I'm sure in his heart he'd rather be there than where he went to in the remarks he made, because after that proud declaration of being a yes voter, it was downhill for Drew Smith, because he characterised the debate as a choice between Scotland becoming a separate country and staying with Westminster. Now, I would ask Drew Smith to look around the world. There are no separate countries in the world these days. There are independent countries, some 200 of them. Stuart Maxwell made an excellent speech about Lithuania. They are countries that govern themselves. They look after their own interests, countries that cooperate with their neighbours when that is appropriate. So the choice that we face is this. It is a choice between being like that, normal and independent, in charge of our own destiny, getting governments that we vote for, or it is about continuing being governed by a Tory government at Westminster. And if Drew Smith wants to defend that, he can be my guest.
Drew Smith.
I'm very grateful to the Deputy First Minister. I actually referred to independence and separation, and actually made the point about language. But the main thing I tried to cover in my speech was around the tone of debate. Can I ask the Deputy First Minister, in terms of how I could ever be persuaded of her case, does she regret referring to a fellow Scot, Alistair Carmichael, as the Secretary of State against Scotland? And will we see more of that in this campaign?
Deputy First Minister.
If there was any doubt at all that Westminster doesn't work for Scotland, then that doubt surely was dispelled this week, when Scottish Labour MPs at Westminster are so used to being outvoted that they don't even bother to turn up to vote on something as important as scrapping the bedroom tax. So there we have it, the price of Westminster government. The Tories impose the bedroom tax, and Labour don't even bother to try to protect Scotland from the bedroom tax. We need powers over welfare in this Parliament. This vote next year is a choice. If we vote no, nothing changes. The Tories continue to dismantle our welfare state. If we vote yes, we express confidence in ourselves and in future generations. We take our future into our own hands. We chart a new future, a better direction for our country. That is what I believe people in Scotland will vote for. And when that happens, no longer will the Tories impose the bedroom tax. This Parliament will be responsible for building that better Scotland that we want to see. And it is that, Presiding Officer, that gives me so much pleasure now to ask members across this chamber to pass the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill.
That concludes the debate on the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 8299 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a revision to the business programme. Any member who wishes to speak against the motion should press the request to speak button now. I now call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 8299.
Moved.
No members asked to speak against the motion, therefore I will now put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion number 8299 in the name of Joe Fitzpatrick be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed to. We now move to decision time. There is one question to be put as a result of today's business. The question is that motion number 8239 in the name of Nicola Sturgeon on the Scottish Independence Referendum Bill be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
The motion is therefore agreed to and the Scottish Independence Bill is now passed. That concludes decision time and I now close this meeting.